Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. We got some boxing topics to cover today. We're not going to stand on ceremony. I'm going to get straight into it, switch it up a little bit, do it different than normal, where I start off by bigging everybody up and waiting for the chat room to fill. We'll just get straight into the boxing topics immediately here, all right? And I'll catch up with you guys, questions and comments after we've got through some stuff. So first up, I spoke about this in a previous stream. You guys might have caught it. But Zuffa Boxing main event for their second event, Charles Martin versus Efe Ajagba, headlining on February 14th. Presumably this means that Charles Martin and or Efe Ajagba has signed a promotional deal with Zuffa Boxing, aka Dana White TKO with Turki Al-Sheikh, I guess in the background, with his input, funding it, or whatever the case may be. Now, these are obviously two fairly well-known fighters in the heavyweight division. Efe Ajagba's got a pretty high ranking currently in the heavyweight division. Charles Martin is a faded former champion. He was champion for like 5 minutes. But these are two guys who certainly hardcore boxing fans are very well aware of. And Ajagba is still relevant in the heavyweight division right now. So for me, Ajagba being signed by Dana White is actually a good move by Dana White and a little bit of a statement of intent. Not as much of a statement of intent as signing Jaya Pataya, but still. Dana White showing that he's absolutely serious in this space. And here's the thing. Frank Warren has got loads of heavyweights right now. And they're not fighting each other as much as they should be. Some of them are fighting each other, of course. Obviously, we just had Fabio Wardley fight Joseph Parker. Right? That was 2 Frank Warren fighters. But again, given how many heavyweights he's got, they're not fighting each other as much as they should be. And so the heavyweight fighters he hasn't got, who are getting mopped up by the likes of Dana White, Zuffa Boxing, potentially. Certainly there's 2 here, and there's another one we're going to talk about in a second. These guys are going to be fighting each other, you know? So how long is it before the public start turning on a Frank Warren and saying, nah, you got this big stable of heavyweights and they're not fighting each other. Okay, Dana White currently doesn't have as much talent as Frank Warren does, but at least his guys are fighting each other. You know, so it's imperative for Frank Warren to get the fights made on a more regular basis between his heavyweights, and fighters of all weight classes, same way. He absolutely needs to do that, okay? So, talking about the Zuffa Boxing heavyweight stable right now, there's Charles Martin and Efe Ajagba. And by the way, I've had all sorts of rumors about what Dana White intends to implement in the coming months and years as far as Zuffa Boxing. There's been rumors about a different shaped ring and you know, all sorts of other weird stuff. We'll see whether any of it comes to fruition. But for now, he's signing various fighters. And according to Gareth A. Davis, in this interview here, he said that there's talk that Andy Ruiz might be signing with Zuffa Boxing next. Yes, Andy Ruiz. These are obviously former PBC guys. Ajagba was with PBC, but then he moved over to Top Rank. Charles Martin, of course, longtime PBC fighter. Andy Ruiz was a PBC fighter since, I think it was the Dimitrenko fight onward. He's been with PBC. If they manage to get Andy Ruiz, again, that's a big move. Okay, all right, Andy Ruiz is maybe underachieved. He basically gobbled up the paydays from the Anthony Joshua fights and spent it on a bunch of nonsense, right? Obviously spent it on some good things too, to take care of his family and whatnot. But, you know, you look at the guy's Instagram and he's all just iced out and designer clothes everywhere and all this kind of stuff. And you think, this guy had so much potential. But as soon as he got that payday, all of his ambition to be, you know, to make the most out of his professional career just seemed to evaporate. Okay, he gave it a go for a little bit, but he quickly became discouraged and just, as I say, floated off into obscurity. The last time he was in the ring, to my knowledge, was when he had that very dubious, was it a draw against Jerome Miller, which most people felt like he lost pretty decisively. So, yeah, Andy Ruiz has had a disappointing career, but again, he's a guy who is very tough. He's got those quick hands. He will stand in the pocket and bang it out with you. And I think that's kind of what Zuffa Boxing are looking for. They're looking for guys who aren't just name brands, but guys who are going to fit with the Zuffa Boxing brand. And that is to deliver, as the UFC claims to, entertaining fights week in, week out. And Andy Ruiz, if you match him right, is exactly that kind of boxer. Jayo Pataya is already certainly that kind of boxer. So that's a big move for Dana White and Zuffa Boxing, for sure. So, another name, according to Gareth A. Davis, that has been associated with Zuffa Boxing, believe it or not, is, well, I've talked about Andy Ruiz. Another name is Vergil Ortiz. Can you believe that? In this very same interview, Gareth A. Davis alludes to this, claim, rumor, however you want to describe it, that Vergil Ortiz might be signing with Zuffa Boxing. Obviously, he's got a lawsuit going on with Oscar De La Hoya, and that is to try and break free of his current promotional contract. Is any of this being spearheaded by Dana White? We know Dana White and Oscar De La Hoya have been kind of enemies for many years. Has Dana White, in any way whatsoever, and look, I'm sure that there will be legal ramifications if it was found that Dana White did interfere or try to interfere with Ortiz's Golden Boy contract, all right? I'm just here speculating as a fan. I've got no inside knowledge. I'm just wondering, if there is any kind of influence from Dana White in Ortiz's decision to try and sue his way out of his contract. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And if Dana White managed to sign Vergil Ortiz, it's on and popping now. It's on and popping like Donkey. Like, what? It's on like Donkey Kong if Dana White managed to sign Vergil Ortiz. That'd be crazy. All right, that would be legitimately crazy if he managed to get that over the line. That would really seal the deal as far as him being a major player in boxing. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. We'll come on to your questions and comments. Mr. Lucas says, Usyk has been a clown for the last 6 months. I wouldn't call him a clown. I think that's a bit harsh, but, that's your view. I would say he's deviating from his previously exemplary behavior. It is towards the back end of his career. I don't want to be too harsh, but I certainly don't like the move of him looking to fight Deontay Wilder. I don't like that move at all. So I can definitely agree with you on that. But with regards to the Deontay Wilder Usyk situation, there's rumors about that as well. Rumors that it may not be happening. Rumors that they're struggling to get the money together, so on and so forth. But as I say, we'll move through this stuff in chronological order, the way I've got it laid out here in my OBS streaming software. So yeah, Dana White potentially, according to Gareth A. Davis, signing Andy Ruiz, and also Vergil Ortiz, a much, much bigger deal as things currently stand. According to Gareth A. Davis, also potentially signing with Dana White too. All right, that would be a huge coup for Dana White to sign Vergil Ortiz. Not like Vergil Ortiz is Canelo Alvarez, not like he's some, proven pay-per-view superstar. He isn't, but he's a very relevant fighter. He's in his prime, okay? He's unbeaten, so yeah, and he does have a decent following. So that would be a real big coup. And as I said earlier, Dana White and Oscar De La Hoya really don't like each other. Imagine if Dana White poaches one of Oscar's remaining stars. Probably his biggest remaining star. That would be crazy. Would there be any clapback Thursdays after that? We shall see. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments. Now, somebody there mentioned the potential Usyk-Wilder fight. We've heard from this new, and there were some people trying to correct me on this because this is the way that they're describing themselves as an outfit. Rather than being a promoter, they describe themselves as event organizers. And we're talking here about I Visit Boxing, okay, IVB. These are the people who are rumored to be interested in putting on Usyk versus Wilder in San Francisco in July. But again, there's also rumors that they can't get the money together to pay the fighters. I hope the rumor I'm about to speak about now happens instead. And Ariola Depot has covered this on his channel. There is talk, and he's obviously an insider, there is talk of Derek Chisora versus Deontay Wilder happening. Please, 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 boxing gods, make this fight happen so we don't get Alexander Usyk versus Deontay Wilder, okay? Make this fight happen and let Usyk fight a relevant voluntary if he wants to, fight someone like a Hrgovic, right? That's an acceptable voluntary. If not, take care of business against Ajit Caballel, and if he doesn't want to do any of that, just retire. It's diminishing returns at this stage as far as I'm concerned for Alexander Usyk. The man's 39 years of age. He's not getting any better despite what some misguided people were saying after the Dubois rematch. So we're saying, oh, he's better than ever, he's actually improving. No, he's not. He's really not improving. Yeah, he got a better result in the second Dubois fight, but that's because Dubois fought a lot more aggressively and therefore put himself in harm's way more. So Usyk was able to walk him onto bigger shots earlier in the fight because Dubois was coming forward and he was there to be hit. Okay, obviously it was a gamble. He was hoping that in being more aggressive, he'd give himself opportunities to land more big shots earlier on in the fight. It's kind of a knock the other guy out or get knocked out trying type of scenario, type of strategy. Okay? And I can respect it because at the end of the day, he tried boxing Usyk first time around. It didn't work. Second time around, he came in looking to, rather than outbox Usyk, just try and blast him out, Didn't work, but there you go. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about this potential fight here. Derek Chisora versus Deontay Wilder. They were actually supposed to fight way back in the days, many years ago, and they actually held a press conference, which Derek Chisora turned up to, but Deontay Wilder didn't. Some of you guys may remember this, way, way, way back in the days, well over 10 years ago. And there's been talk over the years of potentially Chisora fighting Wilder here and there. I think it would be very fitting, because these guys are contemporaries. They're both older fighters. They're both in their 40s. I think there's only a year or two age difference between them. Both guys are way past their best. Derek Chisora is actually in better form than Wilder. So, yeah, why not do it? Just going to fix something here a sec, folks, so hold tight. All right, I'm back in the building. Big up Kayvon Green. Shout out to Kayvon Green every time. Big up Mr. Luca. We shout out everybody in the chat right now. We've got Stereo Broadcast Boxing. We've got Leo. Big up Leo. Brad's in the place. Cropperting CJ. Nakamizi. We got Liam Goff, aka G-Man. Big up. We got Afro Jam, we got Ryan Watterson, Sabrina, shout out to Sabrina. Sabrina says, hi, a young Christian lady, girly girl, but like the never give up from boxing. Deontay is one of me and my family's favorites. AJ is first in the new boxes. Okay, big up Sabrina. Afro Jam says Ruiz has been training. He has uploaded stuff on his YouTube for a while about a training camp against who? Question mark. He has a lot of out of the ring issues. Yeah, he was having some issues with his baby mom, right? Because he was shacked up with some model or something. And his baby mom was like real bitter about it and taking to social media and exposing this, that, and the other, or so she thought. Yeah, it looked very, very messy there for Andy Ruiz for a minute. Is that still ongoing? I've got no idea. I don't really follow Andy Ruiz on social media like that. Mr. Lucas says Lennox Lewis tried to get a rematch with Mike Tyson? Question mark. What? So from memory, obviously it's a very, very long time ago, there was some kind of talks or some kind of, I don't know if there was any negotiations, but there was some talk in the media about them potentially doing it again, Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson. And I think Lennox Lewis did say he was open to it. You have to understand that I was actually thinking about this earlier on today. I'm certainly critical of Alexander Usyk pursuing a Deontay Wilder fight, okay? Because I don't think even in 20, 30 years' time, beating a Wilder at this stage of Wilder's career would add to Usyk's legacy at all. And I pointed to Mike Tyson and I said that Lewis beating Mike Tyson back then, the totally shot, washed up version of Tyson that he beat, hasn't added anything to his legacy. When people think of Lennox Lewis's best wins, nobody says Mike Tyson because everybody knows Mike Tyson was totally washed at that point. Yes, he's a year younger than Lennox Lewis, but Lewis was far better preserved, okay? And he was in much better form. And I'm going to say that Lennox Lewis fighting Mike Tyson was a far more justifiable fight than Alexander Usyk fighting Deontay Wilder at this stage. Why? Because Mike Tyson was actually on a winning streak of several fights, okay? He lost to Holyfield. That was his loss prior to fighting Lewis. And then he went on a winning streak. Well, there was a no contest against Orlin Norris and also Andrew Golota because those fights ended. Actually, the Golota fight wasn't a no contest, was it? Because Mike Tyson actually tested positive for Herb after that fight. And you know, you shouldn't get a no contest if you only test positive for Herb, right? It's not performance enhancing. But I think he got fined or something. I want to say that still is on his record as a TKO win, second round TKO win. But certainly the Orlin Norris fight got changed to a no decision or a no contest because Mike Tyson landed a punch after the bell, the end of the first round. But anyway, long story short, Mike Tyson, for all intents and purposes, was on a long winning streak in the run-up to the Lennox Lewis fight. He'd beaten people like Julius Francis, he'd beaten people like Lou Savarese, he'd beaten people like Orlin Norris, you know, albeit the no contest thing. He'd beaten Francois Botha, he'd beaten, what's the guy's name now? Brian Nielsen. That was the fight before he fought Lennox Lewis, was against Brian Nielsen. Now, Brian Nielsen was no great shakes, but he was a tough guy. He was experienced. He held some, you know, dubious world title like WBF or something like that. And he was like a top 15 contender, all right? Mike Tyson went in there and blasted him out in whatever it was, 5 rounds. So, not saying these were the greatest fighters in the world that Tyson was beating in the run-up to the Lennox Lewis fight, but they were far better than Terrell Herndon, I can tell you that. And at least he had, you know, multiple wins. Certainly Golota was way better than Herndon can ever dream of being, right? And Mike Tyson won that fight. So Tyson was on a winning streak. Even Francois Botha is better than Terrell Herndon. He knocked out Francois Botha with a beautiful right hand. That was around the 5th or 6th round. So Mike Tyson was on a winning streak, a knockout winning streak in the run-up to fighting Lennox Lewis. So he had a legit top 10 ranking because of that. And there were still people out there who believed in the Mike Tyson myth, you know, and thought that even at this late stage of the game, when Mike Tyson hadn't been living the life, when he had all sorts of problems outside the ring, when he was a really bright burning flame, but a short candle, if that makes sense. You know, Mike Tyson was a flame that burned really brightly, but for a short space of time. Lennox Lewis was a candle that didn't burn as brightly, but burned for much longer. Okay, he was much more of a, a slow burn, whatever. So, yeah, the point I'm making is Lewis fighting Mike Tyson, at the context of the time, was far more justified than Usyk fighting Deontay Wilder now. And Mike Tyson was in much better form than Deontay Wilder is in right now. Okay, so that's what I will say. Nevertheless, as far as Lewis looking for a rematch, it was something that was mentioned at one point, and Lewis said he would be up for it, but Mike Tyson wasn't keen on it. He was asked about it. He was like, nah, man, I don't want to fancy, I don't want to, excuse me, I don't fancy fighting Lennox Lewis right away anytime soon. He might have said something to the contrary. In fact, he did say something to the contrary in the post-fight interview. He asked Lewis if I can fight you again, if I can have a rematch. But then in the weeks or months after that, they asked Mike Tyson again, and he said, not right now. I need a few fights before fighting Lennox Lewis again. I don't want to fight him again right now. I've got no interest in getting my butt kicked again. So there was talk, but obviously it never came to fruition. Yeah, big up Kayvon Green. Indeed, big up Mr. Luca for saying, let's pray to the gods Chisora Wilder happens instead of Usyk Wilder. Yeah, Chisora Wilder, nothing against that fight at all, right? Two guys similar age, similar stage of their careers. Got no issue with that fight. Mr. Lucas says, Johnny Fisher going for TKV. Yeah, I was just about to start watching that video before I started this stream. Johnny Fisher hasn't a hope in hell against TKV. He hasn't a hope in hell. TKV is just a much better fighter. And I say this as somebody who previously was actually recommending Johnny Fisher fight the TKVs of the world, okay? But he obviously was totally destroyed, and I've never rated Johnny Fisher. I've always said, to me, he's just like an Essex gimmick fighter. Nothing against the young man, he might be a great guy or whatever. I'm just talking from a purely boxing perspective. I've been saying, when he was still undefeated, this is just a gimmick fighter. He's not going anywhere in boxing, right? He's certainly not going to be a world level fighter, anything like that. But given the nature of the defeat to Dave Allen, I mean, people say he lost twice to Dave Allen, but certainly the second fight was conclusive. And then he comes back against that late substitute in his last fight and nearly gets cleaned out in the first round. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend he goes for Jamie TKV at this stage. I wouldn't recommend he goes for TKV right now. Poor Johnny Fisher, Johnny Bosch. Have I heard about Vlad coming back and possibly training with Usyk? Well, there's been talk about Vlad coming back for the longest time now to try and break George Foreman's record. I did see Vlad in sparring the other day, and he looked pretty terrible, to be honest. Vlad, what is Vlad now, 50? Look, he looked terrible by his standards. Obviously, for his age, the vast majority of 50-year-olds wouldn't look anywhere near as Vlad looked. Wouldn't look anywhere near as good as Vlad looked in that sparring session. But I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was sparring footage of Vlad, and he looked way better 4 or 5 years ago sparring than he did in that recent clip where he looked really bad. Like, his legs didn't look good, his coordination, everything just looked really bad. It was a short clip. You don't know what he was doing prior to that. Maybe he had a tough cardio session or whatever the case may be, or maybe he had been sparring several rounds and he was tired by the end. Who knows? But all I can tell you is, based on that clip, he didn't look anywhere near as good as he looked 4 or 5 years ago when he was sparring. So that shows potentially a lot of deterioration. What do I think of Usyk helping to train him if Vlad does come back? They're countrymen, right? So even from a PR perspective, you'd expect Usyk to say something like that. They know each other. Usyk was in Vladimir's camp and whatnot. Machiavelli says, Bird is the only one Lennox Lewis really ducked. I wouldn't say that Lennox Lewis ducked Chris Bird. Basically, there were two fighters who Lennox Lewis was pushed to fight, was pressed to fight by the sanctioning bodies. One of them was Chris Bird, and the other one was John Ruiz, and he didn't fight them, okay? Did he not fight them because he didn't fancy the styles of those guys, or did he not fight them because there were other fights, bigger fights against more recognized names that he was pursuing instead? And of course, the latter is the case. Right? Chris Bird was an obscure fighter back then. He was obscure. John Ruiz was obscure. But these were the guys who the sanctioning bodies wanted Lennox Lewis to fight. He was going after, bigger names. But, Chris Bird was a decent fighter. He was an awkward southpaw. Nothing special, but he was decent in his day. Yeah, exactly that. Somebody put it far more succinctly than me. Machiavelli said, was it Machiavelli? Excuse me, Little Jacob said, Mike Tyson was a candle that shined twice as bright, but half as long. Exactly that. Kayvon Green says, Hatman, Lennox tried enforcing the rematch clause, at least that's what I remember. Well, normally, the rematch clause only applies to the loser. So if you lose the fight, you get to trigger a rematch clause. I'm not aware of a winner being able to force a rematch with a guy he's just beaten. That would kind of be counterintuitive. So perhaps there was a rematch clause there for Mike Tyson. I don't know. I can't remember too long ago, but there was talk. Lewis expressed some level of interest in fighting Mike Tyson again. If Mike Tyson got back on the horse and showed that he was still viable, Lewis was like, yeah, I'd fight him again. I mean, again, it's a very long time ago, but I seem to vaguely remember Lennox Lewis saying something like, if Mike can come back with a good win, then yeah, I'd revisit the fight. Because he obviously got a massive payday off it. Ryan Ema says, Klitschko waited too long. Amen to that. He waited far too long to try and come back and break George Foreman's record. Shout out to G-Man. He says, Johnny desperate to get boshed again. Afro Jam says, Lewis and Tyson both avoided southpaws. I don't know about that. For one, there was very few southpaws around. In the 1990s and early 2000s, very, very few southpaws around. So off the top of my head, I can name a few. Corey Sanders, Michael Mora. Who else was there now? Alexander Zolkin. He wasn't particularly good. Chris Bird. Was Joe Hip a southpaw? I want to say Joe Hip was a southpaw. Yeah, he was. Joe Hip was a southpaw. He was a Native American heavyweight. I think the only Native American heavyweight boxer I've ever seen was Joe Hip. Obviously, Joe Louis had some Native American ancestry, but I'm talking about like a pure-blooded Native American. Joe Hip's the only one I've ever seen. Joe Hip was a tough guy, kind of a tall, blubbery heavyweight, southpaw with absolutely no defense whatsoever. Okay, the comedian says, if this fight happens, Derek's going to wipe the floor with Wilder. Right now, I would pick an insect to win against Wilder. Wilder versus a fly. I know where I'm putting my money. It's all going on the fly. I would favor Derek Chisora over Deontay Wilder right now too. But I do think some people are going a little over. Maybe they weren't going overboard on how much Wilder has deteriorated. Maybe people were going overboard on how much they felt like Johnny Fisher had improved, because if you guys remember, prior to Johnny Fisher losing to Makhmudov, there was talk of, not Johnny Fisher, excuse me. Dave Allen, right? Maybe people were going overboard on how much Dave Allen had improved after the Johnny Fisher knockout win. Because if you remember several months ago, prior to Dave Allen losing to Makhmudov, there were people saying that Dave Allen would beat Deontay Wilder. And I was like, no way. Even though Wilder is totally diminished, he definitely, in my book anyway, beats Dave Allen. I mean, I think comfortably. And I would stand by that now. I mean, all day, Deontay Wilder over Dave Allen. Like, Arslanbek Makhmudov, folks, who has very slow hands and feet, outboxed Johnny Fisher. Okay? If Makhmudov is Johnny, why do I keep saying Johnny Fisher? Outboxed Dave Allen, right? Makhmudov, who's got slow hands and feet, outboxed Dave Allen. I'm telling you, Deontay Wilder can keep it basic like he did against Herndon and outbox Dave Allen as well, without too much trouble, to be honest. Dave Allen doesn't throw any damn punches. You know, which is why I always pick Makhmudov to beat him. I just thought, Dave Allen don't throw any punches. And this has been a running theme in his whole career, bro. He's always been a guy that doesn't let his hands go, doesn't throw punches. Even in that Johnny Fisher rematch, right? He looked menacing, slinging the big right hand over every now and then, but it was still very low volume. Yeah, you go look at when he fought, who's the guy from Brighton who was managed or trained by Scott Welch? If he's not from Brighton, he's from somewhere down there. The guy that Dave Allen actually knocked out. Fabio Wardley knocked him out in a round as well. His name escapes me. But anyway, when Dave Allen fought him, Dave Allen was getting lit up like a Christmas tree until he clocked him with a big overhand right and knocked him out. You know, so many fights of Dave Allen's, he just marches forward and he doesn't throw any damn punches. When a guy has been following that pattern for his whole career, why would it all of a sudden change at the age of whatever he is now, 33? Why would it change? It's not going to change, right? Dave Allen doesn't throw any damn punches. And so Wilder does throw punches. Okay, he didn't against, you know, higher level opposition like Zhang and Parker, but when he was fighting the Herndons of the world, he was throwing punches. And Dave Allen is better than Terrell Herndon, but he's nowhere near as good as Parker or Zheli Zhang. I mean, not even close. So no, Wilder would throw punches against Dave Allen, no problem. Nick Webb, thank you, Ryan Emus. That's the guy I was thinking of, Nick Webb. That's right. Nick Webb. You know, if you're not throwing any punches against Nick Webb, right, then you're not going to throw any punches against even a fringe level, world level heavyweight. If Nick Webb has got you shelling up, like, come on. And nothing against Dave Allen, by the way, but I'm just saying, objectively, as a boxing fan, somebody that watches boxing, I recognize the patterns. Afro Gem says Allen suffers from severe sparring partner syndrome. James Clifford says, I think there was a time when Lewis had the WBC and Mora upset Holyfield and became the champion. Nobody wanted, as there was supposed to be unification between Lewis and Holyfield. Yeah, Machiavelli has actually got it right. Mora was kind of, and again, I spoke about this in a video I uploaded, I think it was yesterday. Back in the 90s, it was common practice, believe it or not, you know, because people loved the rose-tinted glasses. It was common practice in the 90s for new champions to have a soft first defense. Unless it was a mandatory, the first defense would usually be a soft touch. That was like standard procedure. So, for example, when Holyfield beat Douglas, he didn't go straight away and fight, you know, the toughest contender out there. He fought George Foreman. He was an old man. Do you know what I mean? When Michael Mora again, they recycled George Foreman, the legacy privilege thing. Yeah? For old man George Foreman in his first defense, obviously, that was cherry picking gone wrong. And in fact, they tried to recycle George Foreman so many times because when Riddick Bowe beat Holyfield for the Undisputed, he was supposed to fight George Foreman in his first defense. Not sure how many people realize that, but he was supposed to fight George Foreman in China, of all places, for his first defense. That was the original plan. That somehow fell through, and instead, Riddick Bowe fought Michael Dokes, or washed up Michael Dokes for his first defense. Then he fought Jesse Ferguson for his second defense. But yeah, that's right. Michael Moorer could have fought Lennox Lewis, but no, let's get an easy defense in, a big money spinner against George Foreman. Then we'll go into a serious fight. Mr. Lucas says, Wilder looked way worse against Herndon than he did against Zhang and Parker, to be fair. Well, he threw a lot more punches against Herndon than he did against those guys, and he actually won. I guess you mean worse in terms of what? He looked slower and more methodical? Yeah, it was clear that they'd been working on more conventional boxing, and perhaps that doesn't suit Deontay Wilder. You know, perhaps he needs to conserve his energy and just load up with big single shots because that's what he's been doing for all these years. But that guy that has been in his corner for a while now, but he's now the head coach, Don House, yeah, he appears to have taken Wilder down the conventional route, you know, throwing more punches, not loading up. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. James Clifford says, mad to think back in the day that Henry Akinwande was WBA mandatory to Holyfield and the fight was called off due to Henry getting hepatitis. Holyfield could have lost that one. Yeah, Akinwande was a horribly negative fighter. The only time I can remember Akinwande putting in exciting performances is when he chinned Jeremy Williams. Any guys remember that fight? He knocked out Jeremy Williams, I think, in about 2 rounds. That was a good knockout. And also when he chinned John Fury. That's pretty much the only time I remember him doing anything exciting in a boxing ring. Other than that, it was horrible to watch from Akinwande. There you go. Thank you for correcting me. Johnny Partridge. John Partridge, yes. Please correct me when I make mistakes like that. Gypsy John Partridge. So the box says, Chisora versus Wilder is a great fight, even though it's about 12 years too late. Indeed, JR, let's keep it factual. Gypsy John Partridge, yeah, when he got chinned by Akinwande, that was one of Akinwande's few entertaining performances. Indeed, big up Disgruntled Buddha. The likes aren't liking. Why have we got so few likes here? What's going on, people? What's going on? 170 concurrent viewers, only 47 likes. Let's get them likes up, folks. Thank you in advance. Only takes a split second of your time. Just stick a like on the stream. It really helps with the visibility of these videos so I can get out to a wider audience. So Jimmy says you can't teach a praying mantis to stick a move. That's an interesting analogy. That's interesting. Speaking of praying mantis, um, there was a little praying mantis in my kitchen the other day, and I never realized they moved like that. They've got such a weird way of moving. Also, chameleons. I saw a chameleon a couple months ago in a tree nearby where I live. And chameleons have got this extremely slow-mo, like back and forth, jerky way of moving. And it's like, why were they designed like that? Okay, we should be back. Had some janky internet connection issue there. Let me know if you guys can still hear me. My connection went down 1 second. Okay, I'm back. All good. All right, so Afro Gem says Holyfield tended to do well against better opponents and worse against opponents who were never heard of. Yeah, he is a typical example of somebody who would fight to the level of his opposition. Holyfield was I talk about certain fighters being very good big occasion fighters. There are very few heavyweights over the past 40 years who are better big occasion fighters than Evander Holyfield was. He would always rise to the big occasion. Even if he lost, he'd always put on a great performance, okay, on the big occasion for the most part. When he was the underdog, he'd usually perform out of his skin. I mean, even at the age of what, nearly 50, when he fought Valiev, he put on a great performance for a fighter of his age. So yeah, Holyfield was always a very good big occasion fighter. Mr. Lucas says, Tunde and Paul Smith about to go at it. I might skip that one, to be fair. Tunde and Paul Smith going at it. I mean, Tunde's a very emotional character. Casa says, I felt like he beat Valiev. Many people did. Many people feel like he deserved to get the victory in that fight. Who do I think would have won between Riddick Bowe and old George Foreman? Definitely Riddick Bowe. Mr. Lucas says Tunde is like Don Charles. Yeah, similar. Overly emotional, both Nigerian obviously, but both overly emotional. And that uncontrolled emotion impedes their judgment and causes them to say, some silly things. The box says old Holmes versus old Foreman is the better fight, though. Yeah, and Larry Holmes accused George Foreman of ducking him for years. He said that even when they were both old, Foreman was running away from him. Obviously, Foreman's no longer around to ask him why that fight never happened, but yeah, Larry Holmes was pursuing that George Foreman fight for a long time because George Foreman was the money. Even as an old man, he generated a lot of money. He was somewhat of a cash cow. Larry Holmes never was. Larry Holmes was never embraced the way that George Foreman was. And Holmes was a bitter guy, He was bitter about the fact that he wasn't embraced the way his mentor, Muhammad Ali, was. And he was bitter about the way he wasn't embraced the way Mike Tyson was. He was bitter about the way he wasn't embraced the way George Foreman was. Very, very bitter guy, Larry Holmes. Very bitter. And when I say embraced, yeah, he wanted to be loved by the fans, but he also wanted those mega paydays. And I think he was envious of the way that old George Foreman could come along and get mega paydays, which Larry struggled to get. Striker says Holyfield really should have the record as oldest heavyweight champion of all time off that Valaev fight. Yeah, a lot of people would agree with you. A lot of people would agree with you. Shout out to Arm Planet. Would Prime Holmes have beaten Mike the Mike that he fought? He'd have had a better chance, but I still think Mike Tyson would have won. So Jurassic says Larry is getting a bit more recognition nowadays. Financially, he was apparently successful though. Yeah, because Larry Holmes from day one was kind of a family man. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says testing. Indeed, testing, 1 2 1 2. Yeah, Larry Holmes was always a family man. He was never a flash guy. Like so many of the guys in the 80s. They were, putting their face in that powder. They were partying from dusk till dawn and all that kind of business. That was the 1980s in a nutshell, right? It was party time. Larry Holmes was never into that scene. He had his wife. He's still with his wife. Has she passed away or anything? I'm not aware, but he'd been married to that woman for decades and decades. So Larry Holmes was kind of like the can I say the American dream in terms of the image? Larry Holmes actually lived that image for real. Do you know what I mean? He lived that image for real. He wasn't like a guy who came from a criminal background. He was a straight goer, to use English vernacular. He had his wife, his kids, a family man. And because he wasn't all consumed by vices like so many other fighters, then yes, because of that, he invested his money wisely and so on and so forth. That is true. But who knows? If he'd made the kind of money that George Foreman made, perhaps it would have been different. I don't know. I suspect not, but I'm just throwing that out there. Damn, Afro Jam says Oliver McCall still fighting and winning. McCall's got to be, what, 50 what, 56? How old is Oliver McCall? 58? Big up Ben Oldham. He says, good evening, Hatman. Not sure your super chats are working. A couple of people have sent super chats, so I'm not sure if there's an issue with it or not, because some people have sent them. But yeah, I do get these glitches where some people say they can't super chat on some evenings. I'm not sure what's going on there. You could try refresh the stream. Big up Ben Oldham every single time. You try refresh the stream and see if it works then. Yeah, I remember the Larry Holmes brawl with Berbick, and that's because Berbick said something about Larry Holmes' wife. And yeah, Larry Holmes did a WWE style kick off the top of a car. And the funny thing about Larry Holmes, he was never a very athletic fighter, right? So he had he had good hand speed and, decent foot speed, but he had kind of a stiffness about his non-boxing movement, if that makes sense. So when he tried to do that drop kick off the car, he didn't look like a very athletic kick. He looked older than his years, kicking or trying to kick Trevor Berbick. Okay, people are saying McCall's 60. Has McCall been dropped yet? Not that I'm aware of. Pretty incredible, isn't it? I was thinking to myself the other day, how many times did Muhammad Ali get dropped in his career? Doug Jones dropped him, Henry Cooper dropped him, Joe Frazier dropped him. Um, who else dropped him now? They're saying 5 times. Who were the guys that dropped him then? Doug Jones, Henry Cooper, Joe Frazier. Who are the 2 others that dropped him? Sonny Banks, thank you. Yeah, Sonny Banks. That was before he beat Liston. That's right. Doug Jones, Sonny Banks, Henry Cooper, Joe Frazier. So there's one more. Was it a British fighter that dropped him? Was it Joe Bugner? I don't think it was Joe Bugner. Chuck Wepner. Yeah, Chuck Wepner was the one who had a counted knockdown over him. Yeah. But wasn't it counted as a knockdown? I think it was more like a slip, but wasn't it counted? So it was Wepner. Yeah, it was Wepner. When you consider the fact that Muhammad Ali had how many fights? Close to 70 fights? Was it 60 or 70 fights? To only be dropped 5 times in 70 fights? That's crazy. Do you know what I mean? How many fights has Partridge had? And think about how many times he's been dropped. He's probably not had half the number of fights, or, maybe slightly over half the number of fights Muhammad Ali had. And he's been dropped nearly double the amount of times. Same with Anthony Joshua, right? Anthony Joshua, probably half the number of fights Ali had, and he's been dropped a lot more times. 61 fights, there you go. So Muhammad Ali had 61 fights. Partridge has been dropped 9 times. So damn near double the number of times that Ali was dropped. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. Super chat's not allowing me to write interesting chats tonight. I feel like I am starring in the Adjustment Bureau. Damn. Ben Oldham says super chat's not working, but James Clifford sent one, so I guess they're not working for some, but are working for others. I have no idea why. It's strange, but this does happen from time to time. Some people say they just cannot super chat. I don't know what YouTube's up to. It's very, very odd. Because James Clifford managed to super chat there and some others, but Ben Oldham, and big up Ben Oldham every time. I've got no idea what to advise. Big up Galaxy Edits. Oh wow, Chili Beef is having the same problem. He says super chat's not working for me either. Damn. Should I try and refresh my my side of things? I don't know. Let me try and refresh it for me. Some people are able to super chat, other people not. Is it trigger words in the chat? I don't know. YouTube sometimes has silly trigger words, that prevent people from super chatting. That's my best guess right now. Kieran says, are you using a VPN? No, I'm not using a VPN right now. But yeah, perhaps the people who are trying to super chat, if you're using a VPN, that might be the reason. So, Chili Beef and Ben Oldham, are you using VPNs? That might be the reason. Because I got my VPN switched off. When I switched my VPN on, when using the internet that I'm using here, Starlink, the connection is just diabolical. So I have to switch the VPN off to actually stream. But the thing is, as far as streaming with a VPN, I had no issue streaming with a VPN when I was living in Costa Rica, but that's when I was using normal, like fiber optic internet. Whereas where I live now, I'm using Starlink internet the whole time. And with Starlink, for some reason, when you use a VPN with it, the connection becomes really bad. A shout out to D-Man, he says, No Vibes Found says, why don't you buy a local SIM and run it on portable Wi-Fi? Because that's even worse than Starlink. Portable Wi-Fi is diabolical out here. I can assure you. Absolutely diabolical. Yeah, D-Man says, what annoys you most about casuals? For me, it's if a fighter isn't a big name, they think they are crap. Yeah, that's annoying. It's like when Anthony Joshua was about to fight Andy Ruiz, and all the casuals were like, this is a joke fight. He's fighting some guy we've never heard of, and he's fat. This is terrible. AJ's going to blast him out in a round. And even a friend of mine who's a admitted casual, and he always defers to me because he knows I'm a boxing guy. And he said, nah, man, this guy looks terrible that AJ's fighting. And he was sending me, pictures and, all the memes were going around of Andy Ruiz on the scales next to AJ and people were laughing about it. And I told him, I was like, nah, this guy's dangerous. And he's a good fighter. And he listened to me. He was like, oh, okay, for real? I'm like, yup, he's dangerous. And if AJ's not on his P's and Q's, this guy could turn him over. And what do you know? That's exactly what happened. And I had a feeling in the run up to that fight. And my girlfriend at the time, we both had a feeling that something dramatic was going to happen. And she was like, we were both talking about putting some money on it because I don't gamble. But she was like, yeah, we need to put some money on this because I feel like AJ's going to get turned over. He's going to get chinned in this fight somehow. And we were both kicking ourselves that we didn't. Big up James Clifford. He says, enjoying your Patreon episodes, turned my VPN off. There you go. That could be the issue. If Ben Odom or Chili Beef are using a VPN, that might be the reason that the super chats aren't working. So you can try that out and see. Big up Chili Beef, big up Ben Odom every time. And of course, James Clifford. Afro Jam says the casuals got caught slipping. Ruiz and Fury brought in the big belly era. JR says Akin one day versus Akoli would be a good watch. Behemoth says, I remember years ago seeing highlights of Ruiz Parker and could see he, as in Ruiz, was dangerous. So when AJ suddenly was matched with him after Miller popped, I thought, this ain't an easy one. Yeah. Because I'd seen Ruiz, I'd seen the Parker fight, obviously, and I'd seen loads of other Ruiz fights. I'd seen his fight against Dimitrenko, the fight prior to the AJ match, and his counterpunching was always formidable. An aggressive counterpuncher like that, very fast hands, good chin. And I was someone that was giving Jarrell Miller a very good chance against Anthony Joshua. I was saying the winner of that fight really hinges on whether AJ can hurt Miller, because if he can't hurt him, then AJ's going to be in a very, very hard fight. Because Miller's going to walk him down. He's very physical. He's super alpha. And he's going to try bully him, So I always felt like the Miller fight, if AJ can't hurt him, he's in trouble. Andy Ruiz, a pressure fighter as well, never threw anywhere near as many punches as Miller, not as physically strong as Miller, but faster hands, more explosive. And so I could still see danger there. Big up Kieran Malcolm. Yep, if we can stick a like on this stream, it'll be much appreciated. Thank you in advance. Exactly that, JR. Wilder had just iced Brazil in one, and AJ wanted to put a marker down against the dangerous, much more skilled fighter than Dominic Brazil. That's exactly what it was. That's why AJ went flying in with reckless abandon after he dropped Ruiz. He wanted a spectacular KO win to kind of outdo what Wilder did, and he maybe felt a little anxious because Wilder had knocked out Brazil in one, a guy that AJ took 7 rounds to stop a couple years prior. So maybe he was thinking, okay, I haven't got him out in one like Wilder did Brazil. So now that it's the 3rd round and I've dropped him, I need to get it over with here, because if the fight goes 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds, it's not going to look good for me comparing myself to Deontay Wilder. So he got caught up in that a little bit. I think he actually admitted that after the fight. So Casa says, Ruiz is totally superior to Miller. Well, superior in some areas, but we have to remember that he did lose, really. I mean, officially it was a draw, but I think most of us feel he lost to Jarrell Miller in that fight. He did have a broken hand from quite early on, it has to be said. And his hand was legitimately broken. We saw it after the fight. It looked terrible. The bone was totally out of place, damn near sticking through his skin. So it wasn't any kind of fake excuse. It was a real bad hand injury. Imagine fighting with that kind of injury. You know, I broke my hand in sparring once, and that was just a hairline fracture. The pain was excruciating. You know, never mind having a kind of clean break that Andy Ruiz had in his hand. I mean, how painful that must have been to go, what was it, 10, 12 rounds? With a broken hand like that. So I'll give him that, but even with 2 healthy hands, I think Miller's a tough fight for Andy Ruiz, just because Miller throws so many shots and he's got such a good chin. You know, he just bullies you in there. Ruiz has never really been high volume. Yeah, he's always been a guy that likes to throw short controlled bursts, counters and stuff like that on the front foot, but he doesn't have the physical strength or the output of Miller. But in terms of hand speed and skill, oh yeah, Ruiz is far better in terms of hand speed and skill than Miller. I mean, way better. But Miller can overwhelm more skilled, faster fighters just with his physical presence. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says, I will see if I can find that Usyk gym in Gandia soon and post any interesting photos in your Element group. Wishing everyone here a great week. Big up James Clifford. That'll be fascinating if you can get into the Usyk gym. that'll be real fascinating. Yeah, for sure. I'll be very interested to see any pictures from that. Big up James Clifford. Afro Jam says Ruiz would have problems with Miller, or would always have problems with him. The volume was always going to be problematic for someone whose feet are slow and doesn't have much lateral movement. And that's what I was kind of wondering about in the run-up to that fight. I was saying, you know, Ruiz is not a guy that's used to being pushed back. So when you got a guy who's not used to being pushed back that actually gets pushed back for the first time in his career, how's he going to react? You know? And, well, we got the answer fairly early on. Miller was able to push Ruiz back. You know, and he nullified him by pushing him back. Big up Matt Borgerson. He says, I have to say, I have high hopes that TKO is going to be a problem for these promoters much sooner than estimated. Old or not, names are names and they sell. Well, yeah, but have you heard about this, Matt? This is according to Gareth A. Davis. Not only are and the Jagba's not an old name, right? I mean, the Jagba was never like a massive name, but he's a relevant top 10 heavyweight. Yeah, he's relevant. Jagbot is with TKO now, right? He's going to be fighting Charles Martin in February on the 14th. Andy Ruiz is rumored to be in talks with Dana White. And also, this is a real big one if it actually happens. According to Gareth A. Davis, Vergil Ortiz is potentially going to be signing with Dana White if he can get free from his Oscar De La Hoya contract. Obviously, De La Hoya and Dana White have been enemies for years. Imagine that. Imagine if Dana White is able to snatch up Vergil Ortiz from De La Hoya. That would be crazy. But that is, according to Gareth A. Davis, Ortiz might even be going to TKO. We'll see. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to happen legally and whatnot. But yeah, Gareth A. Davis seems to think that's a possibility. Obviously, Ortiz is a young guy. He's not an old former champion or anything like that. This is a guy in his prime. So big up Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He also says, I'd also love to know how much Turkey and Riyadh season has to do with these pickups. How much of this purse for purchasing fighters is from the UFC? Yeah, that's an interesting one. And, you know, I've been wondering, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything here, but if Turki Al-Sheikh is now prioritizing Dana White TKO, is it possible that he didn't really try that hard to make certain deals, let's say between Boots and Vergil, because neither guy was with TKO yet? Is that a possibility? Is it possible that he's only really going to try and make those fights if at least one of the guys is with TKO? Just food for thought. Just a question. Big up Ben Oldham for the super chat. I guess it's working now. Did you have a VPN on? Was that the issue? Big up Ben Oldham every time. And apologies if you guys can hear roaring rain, because it is absolutely tipping it down outside. Right? It's rainy season here in the part of Africa that I live. And, you know, take rainy season very literally, because it just rains all day, every day. It's very similar to Costa Rica when I was living out there. In rainy season, oh yeah, it does exactly what it says on the tin. The rains are crazy, bro. Okay, Ben Odom says no VPN. I'm actually struggling to even hear my own voice. The rain is so loud here. God damn it all. Galaxy Edit says, Hatman, what age were you when you had your first fight? Do you mean amateur fight, or you mean like any kind of fight, like a fist fight with someone? My first amateur fight, I would have been like 12, 13 years old, somewhere around there. People are saying, can't hear rain, but I sound slightly crackly. Okay, that might be because of the rain hitting the Starlink dish. Because the rain is very, very heavy. Very, very heavy. Big up Rex for the super chat. He says, Rocky Marciano versus Beterbiev, Bivol Benavidez at 184. This is going to sound controversial. Okay, I'm talking awfully loud. Let me turn it down a little bit, because I'm just bringing the laptop closer to my mouth here. Let me turn it down slightly. 1 second, folks. Let's turn it down to a more reasonable level. All right, there we go. I shouldn't be blowing out the speakers now. It should be better. Yeah, this may sound controversial, but I'm not sure that I'd pick Rocky Marciano to beat any of those guys. With all due respect to Rocky Marciano, if you put Bivol Benavidez and Beterbiev back in Marciano's day, they'd be the same size as him. They were heavyweights. in Marciano's day that were literally the size of Beterbiev. I'm talking about top heavyweights. I just think all those guys are more skilled than Marciano. Marciano was very strong. He was a great puncher. He had heart. He was tough. He had stamina. But I don't know. Could he walk down and chop down Bivol the way Bivol moves? I know he beat Jersey Joe Walcott and Joe Louis, who was over the hill, and all these other guys. I'm like, okay, cool. But styles make fights, you know? And I'm not sure. I would obviously give Marciano the best chance against Benavidez. Benavidez got them fast hands, but Marciano's real strong. See, I'm not sure Marciano beat any of them, to be honest. But big up Rex for the super chat. Fernie G says, what do you think TKO's play is here? Pay the names and lowball the up-and-comers? Well, I think Dana White is discovering very quickly that in order to get your foot in the door in boxing, you're going to need a different approach than was the case with MMA, because MMA was basically virgin territory. You know? MMA fighters were not accustomed to getting big purses when Dana White came in the game. So he could basically set the benchmark for what the industry standard purses were. Whereas in boxing, people have been getting paid astronomical purses for like 40 or 50 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, for example, Mike Tyson was making over 20 million a fight over 30 years ago. So if you're paying people 20 million a fight 30 years ago, how are you going to come in today, right, and start lowballing fighters and paying them, I don't know, 800 grand, 700 grand when they're top level world champ? Like, how are you going to do that? You're going to have to try and bring, and I don't agree with this, by the way, right, in terms of the morality of it, but Dana White obviously wants to implement a UFC-style model in boxing where he's got a near monopoly and he can set the purses to a point where he's going to keep most of the money from the shows, not the boxers. That is going to take a very long time to implement, if it's even possible at all, okay? And in order to get fighters on board and to get them to sign with you, you're going to have to be a bit flexible in the beginning. He might not want to be flexible, but I think the reality of it and smart people around him will bring him to that realization sooner rather than later. You're going to have to be a bit flexible to get your foot in the door and to try and corner the market. Chainsaw says, Hatman, do you remember when a colleague called out Dwyer? Yes, I do remember when a colleague called out Dwyer. Okolie is a funny guy. He does make me laugh. Galaxy Edit says, I had my first fight at 15. Is that too late to achieve anything? Hell no, it's not too late to achieve anything. 15 is plenty young enough to make something of yourself in boxing, without a shadow of a doubt. 15 is plenty young enough. If I'm shouting a bit, I'm actually shouting to even hear my own voice because the rain is so loud here. The roof is like made out of metal or something, and when the rain hits it, it just sounds like an absolute racket. This rain is so heavy, if you stepped out in that rain for literally 2 seconds, you would be soaking from head to toe as if you just jumped in a swimming pool. It's that heavy. It's crazy. Hell hath no fury like an African thunderstorm. Trust me. African thunderstorms are a sight to behold. Okay, Joe says, who would win in a fantasy matchup between Riddick Bowe and Larry Holmes? It's a very good fight. I got Larry Holmes. Prime for prime. I think Holmes gets it done. He's a bit sharper, more disciplined, better defense, smaller, right? A lot smaller, shorter in height, similar reach. I want to say Holmes had that extra versatility because he could get up on his toes and move. Riddick Bowe had no back foot game. No back foot game at all. Hannibal says, I want to visit Africa but don't have any information. So there's a YouTuber who I didn't even know existed until I think last week because he visited the country that I live in. I think he's like the biggest streamer in the world called iShowSpeed. And he's been doing the rounds in Africa over the past, whatever it is, couple of weeks. So you might want to check out some of his videos if you wish. Doesn't make the kind of content that I'm particularly into, but just to have a look around and see what he thinks of Africa, various different countries. Check out some of iShowSpeed's videos, recent videos. D-Man says, apparently people were shocked Africa had roads. Yeah, the misperception that people have about Africa is crazy. I mean, a lot of people in the West literally think that Africa is just nothing but slums. I think the whole place is just like slums and starving kids with like bloated bellies with flies and stuff like that. Nah, bro. Yeah, Addis Ababa is very developed and modern and all that kind of stuff. Very much so. What I will say is, in Africa, right, I mean, they talk about the poverty gap, you know, the gap between rich and poor in the West. But how you measure the gap between rich and poor depends on how you define rich and how you define poor, right? Because visually, the gap between rich and poor in Africa is way bigger than the gap between rich and poor in the West. I mean, way bigger. So where I live, for example, yeah, in the capital city, you'll see locals, you know, local Africans, indigenous Africans, who are middle class or upper class, driving around in big SUVs and nice cars, and they live in big houses with swimming pools, all that kind of stuff. All right, that's quite common. A lot of the places where I hang out and go to eat, it's full of, you know, well-to-do locals making money in all kind of different businesses and whatnot. At the same time as there's that going on in the city, there's also slums in the city where people literally don't have a pot to pee in, and they are living in the most, you know, bone-grinding poverty, exactly like you see on the television in slums. So yeah, the gap between the haves and the have-nots in many parts of Africa is absolutely astronomical. It's a huge gap. Obviously, the rich people, for the most part, in most African countries, aren't as rich. as the rich in the West, but they're rich enough to live a very nice life, with cars. And if he's a man, he's got a few wives or a wife and several mistresses, and sends his kids to private school and lives in a gated community. Like, loads of Africans live like that. Yeah. I'm not saying it's the majority at all, but there's a decent proportion, like a pretty large middle class where I live, of locals who live like that, but then a larger proportion who live in horrible poverty. So yeah, a huge wealth gap in many African countries. Huge wealth gap. But in the Western media, all they tend to show you is the poor Africans. They don't show you the well-to-do Africans, which are very visible when you come to Southern Africa. When you're in the shopping malls and all that kind of stuff, and you hang out at the restaurants, you'll see all the well-to-do Africans everywhere. You look out in the car park, right? The parking lot, as Americans call it, and it'll be full of SUVs and nice cars and whatnot. What do I think of the Ring Magazine Awards? Big up Galaxy Edits. I like the first awards, where Usyk got all those awards and Partridge was upset. That was funny. When are the next awards? Are they happening sometime soon? On the 30th of this month of January. Okay, that's interesting. I'll definitely be checking those out. Striker says apparently the next awards are happening the week of T.O. and Shakur. Yeah, that should line up then with the 30th. No, I don't think I've ever heard that. Did I ever listen to 60/40 by Roy Jones, his diss track to James Toney? No, I don't think I've ever heard that. I'm sure it's funny though. So KD versus the World says, I'm moving back to Africa soon. Let me tell you about something. And this isn't exclusive to Black Americans, all right? But it is something I see a certain section of the Black American community being very vocal about, all right? Especially the whole, what do they call themselves now? What do they call themselves? FBA, right? Foundational Black Americans. There's a lot of FBA types who will go onto pages or, YouTube channels like Austin Holloman, and day in, day out, they'll tell Austin Holloman, who literally lives in Africa, how bad Africa is and how he needs to return to America. And they'll list like a zillion different reasons why Africa's terrible and it's stupid for any person, be they a Black American or whoever from America, to go and live in Africa is stupid. And these are people who've, for the most part, never set foot outside of the United States in their entire lives. but they're giving you this massive lecture, and they're obsessed with following people and constantly commenting about how you're a coward for leaving America and Africa's terrible and Africans don't like us and this, that, and the third. All it is with most of those people is they're jealous. That's all it is. Because they can't travel internationally and up sticks and leave and live in a different country. They're jealous. And because they're jealous, in order to cope with their jealousy, they want to believe that things are going to end in disaster for you. If you go live in Africa or you go live in Latin America or the Far East, they want to believe that it's all going to end in disaster for you. Because that's what helps them sleep at night. Simple as that. So don't listen to them people there. That's not to say there aren't challenges, okay, living in developing countries, because there are challenges and there are differences. There are things, you'll have to get used to. In terms of like security, well, security is, it falls more on the responsibility of the individual to make sure they're safe and secure in many parts of Africa, as opposed to relying on the state, relying on the police, all right? Where I live, very rarely will you ever see police cars, right? Once in a blue moon, you'll see a police car. It's very rare to see them. And when you do see police, you don't realize they're police at first because they look more like soldiers. They're walking around with like green fatigues on, or some kind of green, khaki green uniform, and an AK-47 over their shoulder. And you're like, that's the police? Damn. I thought that was a soldier. So, there's always trade-offs. Wherever you move in the world, there's the rough and the smooth. So it's a case of moving to the country or living in the country whose BS you're most willing to tolerate, because every country has their own BS. It's which BS you're willing to put up with. Pick your poison, basically. Pick your poison. Hannibal Beat says some of them ain't jealous, they're just plain stupid. Yeah, some of them are plain stupid. Some of them are plain stupid and jealous at the same time. Hannibal Beat says, I'm looking at some spots in Africa right now that look just like Miami. Here's one of the mistakes, though, that some Black Americans make when they come to Africa, is they're looking for familiarity, yeah? If you just want to visit Africa because, it's the ancestral homeland of Black people and everything like that, you're not really looking to relocate, then yeah, go ahead and visit the places that look just like Miami and whatnot. But if you're looking to relocate because you don't like the way things are in the States or in the West, then you want to avoid moving somewhere that looks too Western, that looks too familiar. Because you're going to end up finding the same problems there that you're running away from in America or the UK. You know what I mean? But a lot of people are kind of, I don't want to say scared, but they feel uncomfortable in unfamiliar surroundings. So when they see parts of Africa that remind them of the West or remind them of the United States in terms of the buildings and the infrastructure and whatnot, and even the way people are dressing, they're like, okay, this seems familiar. I should go there. An example would be South Africa, right? A lot of South Africa looks like the United States, but boy, I wouldn't want to go there. Like, not to live anyway. To visit, yeah, beautiful. I mean, parts of Cape Town just stunning. Around that Cape Town area, just absolutely beautiful to look at and maybe experience for a short trip. But living there, nah. I wouldn't want to live there. If you think America's dangerous, you ain't seen nothing yet. Compared to South Africa, it's crazy. Afro Gem says some FBA were dying to go to Colombia and Brazil, which are both way more violent than the safe parts of Africa. Yeah. Colombia and Brazil are far more dangerous than I want to say most of Africa. Far more dangerous. Mainly because the drug trade is so big in Colombia and Brazil, and there's far more guns in Colombia and Brazil than there is in most African countries. Yeah, Windhoek is very westernized. For those who don't know, that's in Namibia. Windhoek is very, very westernized. And Namibia is relatively safe, but not as safe as Zambia, for example, which is safer than Namibia, really, as I understand it anyway. And, as far as Latin America, I'm just coming from Latin America, right? I just moved out here to Africa a few months ago. Prior to that, I was living for several years in Costa Rica. And my experience in Costa Rica was great for the most part. I had no issues at all. But obviously, I was living in a gringo town. We're living in a gringo town, you're not going to have any problems. It's full of other people from the West. High police presence, no one's going to bother you. But very expensive compared to where I live now. I mean, where I live now in Africa is extremely cheap. One of the reasons I moved there. My money just goes so much further. It's weird coming from Britain, where I would be considered, not in terms of my family background, but in terms of my income, I'd be considered like middle class in England. Whereas my income, on the same income here in this part of Africa, I'm basically considered rich. Now, there are plenty of people that live in this country that make way more money than me. When I say plenty, I mean, there are some. But the amount of money I make is equivalent to a lot of government ministers, so I'm told. So I'm considered by the majority of the population in the rich category. KD versus the World says, don't go to Kenya. I've never been particularly keen on Kenya because it's so westernized, because there are so many passport bros, because the women there are becoming increasingly westernized in their thinking and all that kind of business. So I've never been that keen on Kenya. But one of the things about Kenya that means I can't dismiss it entirely as a place that I might consider living for some period of time, even if it's fairly short, is their digital nomad visa. See, that's one of the challenges that I've come up against being in Africa so far is being a digital nomad, somebody that works remotely, that runs a business remotely. I've got, businesses, main business based in the UK, which I can run from anywhere. So when you're doing remote work like that, right, running a UK business from abroad, not all countries have got a visa specifically for that. So you have to try and find workarounds, which can be a bit techers, to use an old school London word. It could be a bit techers, right? Bit technical, bit tricky. Whereas Kenya actually has a specific, I think they call it remote workers visa, which makes it nice and easy. Mauritius also has a remote workers visa, nice and easy. Whereas and I think South Africa's about to introduce one, but most other places in Africa don't have this, which again, for people in my position is a bit awkward. Costa Rica, where I just came from, they have a digital nomad visa. And an increasing number of countries around the world are now starting their own digital nomad visa program. We got Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He says, if Vergil Ortiz signs with TKO, how will he fight for actual titles against world level competition if they won't associate with others? Well, that's a great question, Matt. And that's what we're all wondering. That's what we were all wondering after Jai Opetaia signed with TKO, because in Jai Opetaia's social media posts since signing with Dana White, he's been saying, I can't wait to become undisputed. And it's like, well, either Dana White is going to go back on his word and actually allow some work with sanctioning bodies, or someone hasn't given Jai Opetaia the memo. We'll find out in due course what's actually going on. KD versus the world says, I would not want to live in Mauritius. Why is that? So yeah, great question from Matt, and we'll have to find out. Afro Jam says Zambia's economy is doing well. Yeah, it's doing relatively well. The kwacha, the Zambian currency, is performing well and whatnot. And it's kind of puzzling as to why Zambia is so cheap, even compared to its neighbor Zimbabwe, which is in the toilet economically. Zambia is doing way better economically than Zimbabwe, yet somehow Zimbabwe is significantly more expensive. Probably take an economist to explain how that works. I'm not quite sure. Kieran Malcolm says, Hatman, do you miss your family and friends? As in being in the same location as them? No, I don't. My family all left the UK decades ago. So, I've been living away from them since forever anyway. And as far as my friends, they're doing what they're doing. I'm doing what I'm doing. We can keep on top. We can keep in touch on WhatsApp as we do, or Telegram or whatever. So, short answer is no, I don't. As in, I don't need to be in physical proximity of them. I don't feel, sad when being away from them or anything like that. No, I don't. So KD versus the world says the racial makeup of Mauritius. Well, there are still, as I understand it, plenty of black people in Mauritius, but yeah, the majority are of, Indian subcontinent racial phenotype, but there are black people that live there. And there's a couple who are Black Americans, actually. I think their channel's called Journey With Us. It's a husband and wife, Black American couple that got loads of kids together, like 7 kids or something together. They live in Mauritius, and they've lived in several African countries, but they settled in Mauritius a year or so ago, and they love it. So, I don't know. And they're very much the Afrocentric types, and they lived in Tanzania and they lived in this country and that country, but they settled in Mauritius and they say it's working well for them out there. So I am going to visit Mauritius, by the way. Check it out for myself and see what I think. Nope, none of my family live in the UK. My family left the UK decades ago. Fernie G says, have you encountered any Black Americans where you are now? Yeah, I've seen a few here and there. Seen a few Black Americans here and there. Maybe no more than 5 of them. I saw a couple of Black American girls in the supermarket the other day, like 2 of them. I could tell instantly they were Black Americans by the way they were dressed. Even before I heard them speaking, I knew they were Black Americans. I knew they were Black Americans or Black Brits, like immediately when I saw them. Yep, all my siblings, 100% of my family do not live in the UK. None of them are, not even one family member in the UK. None of them. They all left decades ago. Are any of my old mates still into street stuff? No. And if they were, I would distance myself from them. So Kate King says, someone over the age of 40 shouldn't move to non-Western country that doesn't offer the same level of healthcare as they had back at home. High quality healthcare is very important as you get older. I mean, that is a blanket statement. So you're saying no one over the age of 40 or someone over the, I totally disagree with it. In fact, I want all my money back that I've paid into the NHS for all these years. I want all the money back. I want all my money back. All right, the NHS at this stage is nowhere near worth the money that you're paying for it. I can get private healthcare where I live, cheaper than the NHS, better quality. So the key is, if you move abroad, right, to a developing country like this, make sure you're a tax resident of the country and you're not still paying into the damn NHS. Because the money that you were paying into the NHS, just get a private healthcare provider here and you're good to go. Okay? There are plenty of good, like clinics and private hospitals and stuff like that here. I literally want all my money back from the NHS. Thousands and thousands are paid in. I want my money back. No, I never use public transport out here. Hell no. That's one thing I did. I wasn't using public transport in the UK. I hate public transport. Don't get it twisted. Public transport in the UK is several orders of magnitude better than public transport here. In terms of, the quality of the vehicles and, and the number of passengers aboard and all that kind of stuff. I hate public transport, so no, I just get around in cabs. I do plan on getting myself a car out here. Right now, I'm just getting around using, it's not Uber, but it's a similar app to Uber, which is popular out here. It's actually a Russian company. Big up Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He says, do you think there's a possibility that Dana may be allowing top level athletes to compete outside of TKO like PFL does? I suspect he won't. I suspect that he may allow them to partake in unifications and stuff like that, but only on TKO shows. And once they become undisputed or whatever, maybe there's an agreement that they give up all the belts after that and only use the TKO belt moving forward. Because that will then legitimize the TKO belt. Like, so for example, if Opataya manages miraculously to get a fight for undisputed, right, to mop up the other belts at cruiserweight, if he then gives all those belts up and adopts the TKO belt instead, Dana White can then legitimately say, this TKO belt represents the best cruiserweight in the world. We don't need the other belts because Opataya's already proved himself. So if anyone wants to prove themselves number one, they got to fight for this TKO cruiserweight belt, not the other ones. You see what I'm saying? So I suspect he will kind of go against what he said before and allow Opataya maybe to participate in unifications for the other, but I could be wrong. Perhaps he won't. Perhaps it's just a case of Opataya not getting the memo. Not realizing that all that undisputed stuff goes out the window as soon as you sign with Dana White. We'll see. It's a confusing situation at the moment for all of us. A big up Matt Borgerson for the super chat. He says, would you rather eat warm cow manure or spoiled cheese that may give you salmonella? Damn. I'll go with the spoiled cheese. I'll go with the spoiled cheese. Because cheese, I mean, for some cheese, they allow it to go moldy, right? So I'll take my chances with the cheese. Yes, that's true indeed. A record number of Brits left the UK in 2023 and 2024, and that trend is continuing in 2025. And the Brits that are leaving are young people. Did you realize that? Record numbers of young people, and not leaving just to go on holiday or go backpacking, leaving for good. Record numbers of young Brits are leaving for good. Educated Brits, people with degrees and skills, they're leaving for good. Matt says salmonella is agonizing pain though, but isn't salmonella from chicken? Or can you get it from all sorts of dairy? I thought you get salmonella from like chicken, poultry, you know, eggs and chicken and whatnot. Can you get it from cheese? Does the cheese have to be contaminated by eggs or poultry or something to get salmonella from cheese? We got Matt, he says, I'm so glad I left the USA with the Greenland BS. Yeah, so much for Trump doesn't engage in imperialism. That was the ticket that the Trumpers were latching onto for the longest. Oh, Trump, he leaves everyone alone. And come on, man. You really believe all that? I don't like politics and I don't like politicians. I don't follow any political parties. I don't pedestalize prime ministers or presidents or any of these people. The political class is dirty, and I try to engage with it as little as possible. I just have no time for it. Now, some people will say, well, if you don't engage with politics, then you can't complain. But it depends on how you look at it, because I don't think most people can have any impact on the direction of travel that a country goes by engaging in politics. I think it's futile. That's why I don't engage with it. I think the only people who can really change the direction of travel for a country politically are powerful businessmen or groups of businesses and stuff like that. Then you've got skin in the game. Then politicians might actually seriously listen to you to some level. But if you're just like the average citizen, they don't give a damn about you. They're just going to tell you what you want to hear to get your vote and then do whatever they want, do whatever they plan to do in the beginning, which might be contrary to what they promised you they were going to do. So I feel like I'm wise enough to realize that they don't give a damn about me or people like me. And it doesn't matter which party you vote in, they're never going to give a damn about you. You don't have enough skin in the game. You don't have enough clout economically, socially, for them to care. And so engaging in politics when you're a person who no party's going to care about is an exercise in futility. And all that's going to happen, you're just going to end up really frustrated and upset and, disillusioned all the time, complaining about other groups and this group and that group and pointing fingers at fellow people who are in the same boat as you, but they're a different religion or a different color and blaming them. And that's just the race to the bottom, bro. I don't engage in all that. Politicians are not going to save my life. I've never relied on a politician to better my situation because, as I say, I know I don't have enough clout for a politician to help me. So, or any political party to help me. So I'm a lot more, independent thinking rather than hoping that the state is somehow going to help me. I grew up as a kid not expecting the state to help me and thinking I need to help myself here. A shout out to Matt. He says, if he attempts to take Greenland, US falls into Great Depression worse than the 1930s. So does the rest of the world. Most likely being cut off from EU is bad. I don't know the potential ramifications of it. I'm just shaking my head and, it's just politics are politicking, That's what politicians do, innit? The politics is politicking. I try and engage in this stuff as little as possible, bro. Big up Ben Odom for the super chat. Much appreciated, my guy. He says, I left the UK at the age of 27. I came back in 2009. I'm now peacefully content in North Wales. Friendly, beautiful, peaceful people, safe place to raise kids, mountains, beaches, waterfalls, etc. And this is ultimately what it comes down to, right? I always talk about boxing coaches, and people have these debates about who the greatest trainer of all time is and who the best trainer in the world is. And when people believe a particular trainer is the best, they can sometimes develop this misguided view that every fighter would be better if they were trained by this guy. But no, there's no one-size-fits-all trainer in boxing. And this is kind of a clumsy analogy, but there's no one-size-fits-all country in the world, Some people are going to be perfectly happy living in Britain. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're happy living in Britain, continue living there. I'm not urging you to leave if you're happy living there. There are people that are happy living in North Korea. If they're happy there, why change it? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Different strokes for different folks. The people I speak to with regards to relocating out of the West are people who don't like it. And so I speak to them and say, you don't have to put up with it, all right? There are ways out to go elsewhere and live a different type of life and whatnot. But I would certainly never denigrate anyone in any country who likes living there. Yeah, if you like living in Britain, like Ben Odom, big up Ben Odom every time. He enjoys North Wales and all that kind of stuff. Great, Me personally, I don't like the climate in Northwestern Europe. The cold weather. I promised myself several years ago I will never endure another British winter. I just can't do it. Also, politically, I don't like the climate, the political climate, as well as the actual climate. I don't like the political climate in Britain these days. Especially as somebody who's not indigenous to the UK. So I mean, I don't like the political climate. So it's not for me, but if other people are happy there, Big up Ben Odom and anyone else who's happy living there. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Continue living there, you know? Find your own peace and enjoy it. But big up Ben Odom every time. He's enjoying life there in North Wales. So Fernie G says, do you think we'll know by the year's end if TKO's model will work long-term or not? I don't think we'll know by year's end. I don't think so. The people involved in this venture have got extremely deep pockets, and I'm not just talking about Turki Al-Sheikh. TKO, as I understand it, and this is according to Gareth A. Davis, right? So take it up with him if these figures are wrong, are worth something absurd like 40 billion? 40 billion? If not TKO, then their parent company or whatever, worth 40 billion. Now, a company worth that much, well, they're in it for the long haul, bro. You know, this ain't gonna be a little flash in the pan Triller type situation. This is gonna be, you know, and they're working with Dana White and Nick Khan, who are experienced people in sports and entertainment. So this is a long-term project. And I don't think, see, what I will say is, whether they decide to stick with the original plan, I think will hinge on whether they can get the Muhammad Ali Act reformed. You know, they're trying to change or modify the Ali Act to allow promoters to also manage fighters and promoters to have their own sanctioning body and all that kind of stuff, right? If they can't manage to get that act amended, then it might all fall apart. And it might all fall apart quite quickly. So I think a lot is going to hinge on that. And whether or not that goes through in 2026, I don't know. But if it does go through, yeah, this is going to be a long-term project. I don't think we'll be able to tell by the end of the year whether it's going to work or not, or at least work to the extent that Dana White wants it to work. He literally wants control of boxing as a sport the way he has control of MMA. I don't personally think he can do it, but we'll see. Amali says, do you think Red Pill are good voices for young men? Well, that's a very broad question. I think that Red Pill manosphere content is necessary to swing the pendulum back in the other direction. That doesn't mean I endorse or co-sign every manosphere Red Pill person out there and all the stuff they're saying. I don't endorse all of it. But what I'm telling you is the pendulum in the West has swung so far in the anti-male, however you want to describe it, woke direction, that the red pillars are necessary to create some level of balance, you know? Because the people who are pushing the anti-male, misandrist, woke stuff, they're extremists. You know, they can't be reasoned with, most of these people. Unfortunately, such is the nature of human beings, you have to fight fire with fire sometimes on the internet. So that's my opinion. S says, see, I'm always curious about this question. No offense to S, but I'm always curious as to why people ask this question. Are you ever coming back to the UK? I will be coming back to the UK to sort some stuff out for a couple of weeks. But in terms of moving back to the UK, no, I have no intention to ever move back to the UK for the rest of my life. Zero. Never move back to the UK. Unless there was some crazy, unforeseen circumstances that came up. You know, let's say it was an alien invasion and the only safe place to live was the UK. Then I might consider it. Did you guys lose me for a second there? I think my stream might have cut out briefly, but I was saying, in terms of visiting the UK, I do have a couple of things to sort out in the UK. I've got some stuff in storage. Okay, now it says my stream health is poor here, so please bear with me. I hope that my internet connection picks up in just a second. I'll just refresh this tab here. So yeah, long story short, I've got no intention to ever move back to the UK. And I am kind of curious as to why people think I might want to. So I'm always kind of puzzled by that question, you know? Oh, wow. So Jimmy says, Giants promoter says, in order for him to sign with Zuffa, they reassured him that they would work with the sanctioning bodies and others in order for him to unify. Well, what they say and what's in the contract are two different things. So I hope he's got that in writing. And I hope he's got a good lawyer that dotted all the T's and crossed all the I's, you know? Chili Beef says, I get that UK question a lot also, as if it's Graceland or something. Yeah, I'm kind of baffled by that. I don't like cold weather. And I can't really express to most people how much I hate and despise cold weather. Literally from the core of my soul, I hate it. I never want to experience cold weather again for the rest of my life. Hate it. And for me, cold weather, and I'm being serious here, for me, cold weather is probably anything below about 18 or 20 degrees Celsius. Anything below that, I would consider cold. I don't want to ever experience it ever again for the rest of my life. Not in terms of a place where I live. Never. I can't stand cold weather. I hate it. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. EJ says Super Chat never works for me. Yeah, there were some other people that were having issues with Super Chat earlier on, but they managed to resolve it. I'm not sure how they resolved it. Maybe they turned the VPN off or refreshed the stream, or I'm not sure how it was resolved for them. But yeah, other people were having issues Super Chatting as well. Amali says, have I played Uncharted 4? Yes, I have. Played it when it came out. Kieran Malcolm says, when I leave the UK this summer, I'm only coming back to visit. Same, bro. I hate the cold, especially when I'm at work on a building site. You know, that's a great question there by Jonathan Porky. He says, I wonder how the top UFC fighters feel about being paid pennies compared to what Dana is probably paying these boxers. That's a great question. Dana seems to have, he hasn't abandoned UFC, but he's deprioritized UFC now in favor of boxing. And he's done so, in my view, because he knew that if Turkey continued on the trajectory he was on with boxing, UFC was in danger of becoming, was in danger of being overtaken, okay, even in the American market, if Turkey continued in the vein that he was on. So I think Dana has seen that and thought, no, I need to get involved in this now. if boxing is going to supersede MMA, UFC in America, I need to be the one in control of it. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how those UFC fighters react when they're thinking, hang on, we're under a Dana White umbrella. These boxers are under the same guy, but they're getting paid way more than we are. Like, there might be a mutiny. Very, very good question. You know, my reasons for leaving the UK are numerous. First and foremost, I never planned to stay in the UK for the rest of my life anyway. I wasn't born in the UK. I came to the UK at the age of, whatever it was, 7, 8 years old with my family. And my parents never planned to stay for the rest of their lives. I never planned to stay. So it was never in the plans to stay in the UK forever, you know? And I know some people move to the UK from other countries and they also say that, oh yeah, it's just temporary, we're just going to make some money and go back home. But they end up staying forever. My parents and my family were serious. We're going to come here, we're going to live here for a few years, and then we're going to move back. They were serious, they meant it, and they did it. And so was I. I was serious, I meant it, and I did it. I never planned to stay in the UK for the rest of my life. Why? Well, the weather is a big part of it. I don't like British weather. And certainly over the past 25 years, the direction that Britain has been going culturally in the West in general, not just Britain, is very troubling to me. You know, I've seen so much social degradation. And I'm not talking about crime, because actually crime in the 80s and 90s, violent crime, was higher than it is now in the UK. When I talk about social degradation, I mean like communities, the behavior of people, male-female relations, the breakdown of families, all that kind of stuff, you know? Acquiescence to authority. People seem to be, I mean, maybe Keir Starmer's actually going to change this, not deliberately, but because he's so awful, perhaps he's uniting British people to be more rebellious against the state. I don't know. Maybe that's a unintended but positive byproduct of Starmer's regime. But yeah, like the way the West is going politically and socially is very disturbing to me. And I don't want to be in a country that's going in that direction, at that speed. Chili Beef saying Power Slap has dropped off, the stupidest thing ever. Yeah, Power Slap, what a bizarre sport. They even got female power slapper. You seen that? Chili Beef says, how did you feel when your parents left? How did I feel when my parents left? I didn't feel particularly strongly. I was just like, okay, that's annoying. So if because I don't have anywhere now to go, even for a few months, to save up a bit of money, now I'm always going to be paying rent. So when my parents left, I was like, that's a bit annoying. But I wasn't like devastated or anything. I didn't feel instantly lonely. I've never been as attached to my parents as maybe most people are. I don't have an issue with them, but I've always been like kind of very independent emotionally. Like most of my life, I was never someone that was like super attached to my parents where I have to check in with them every week or see them every couple of weeks. I've never been like that. Certainly not as an adult. And even from teenage years on, I was never someone that was like really closely emotionally attached to my parents. And there's nothing wrong with it if you are, obviously. I'm not criticizing anyone who is like that with their parents, but I never was like that. So moving away, them moving away and me living in different countries, and it was never a problem for me. I don't need to be close to my family and all that kind of thing, to feel comfortable and whatnot. Do I have a big family? Yes, I do. Relatively big, yes. Amali says, talentless fools acting hard. What type of man slaps anyway, bro? Yeah, it's a bizarre sport, isn't it? Kate King says, you would hate most of the states in America during the winter. It's 20 Fahrenheit, -7 where I'm located. Well, it depends where you are in America, right? I mean, the southern states, at least at low altitude, it's going to be nice weather or warm weather all year round, somewhere like Florida. Again, many of the southern states. Big up EJ for the super chat. He says, why do you think boxers don't get cancelled in the same way other sportsmen do? We have women beaters and racists, but we don't cancel them. That's a good question. Boxing has always been seen as kind of a dirty sport. And I'm not talking about PEDs. I just mean like society's perception of boxing, because of maybe the fact it came out of the criminal underworld, like boxing is synonymous with criminality. It has been since its inception and still is now. So it's maybe kind of, to some extent, accepted that boxers are going to be a bit uncouth compared to like tennis players or football players or whatever the case may be. Do you know what I mean? You've also got the fact that boxing is almost the epitome, the way boxing is run is almost the epitome of capitalism, right? It's unstructured. Anyone can enter. The barrier for entry is very low. It's a bunch of people competing against each other and, all that kind of thing. The lack of structure to it makes it very easy for people to get involved, and, it's like a capitalist dream. Anyone can get involved in boxing, set yourself up as a manager or a promoter or anything like that. And that independent nature or that independent spirit permeates every facet of boxing. So again, I think it's wider society kind of accepts that boxers are kind of more independent people. Like in football, if a player says something which is deemed politically incorrect, they say that, oh, well, it reflects badly on the team. It reflects badly on the national sport. It reflects But if a boxer says something, I mean, most people don't even know who promotes him. I'm talking about the wider public. They don't even know who his promoter is. Who do they complain to? You see what I'm saying? So, yeah, I do think there's kind of more boxing as a sport is given more leeway for the stuff that people say, because it's a more independent, spirited sport, and it's seen as kind of a dirty sport. It's always been seen that way. Big up EJ for the super chat. Are my parents interested in visiting me in Africa? I don't think so, no. They're not. My parents are very old, and they're very stuck in their ways, and they actually don't fly anymore. They had an experience a couple decades ago now, where there was some really bad turbulence on a flight they were on, and it scared the living daylights out of them, and they haven't set foot on a plane ever since. So there's that. Kieran Malcolm says nothing happened to Luke Partridge after his hilarious verbal attack on David Price. That was before the whole cancel culture thing, though. That was before that. It was maybe starting to creep in, but it wasn't in full flow. Because that might have been around, what, 2012, 2013 or something, was it? Was it earlier than that? NJ says, and people separate fighters from the actual person, or I guess you meant to say the sport? Separate fighters from the sport itself, or I'm not sure how you meant to word that. No, they flew back to the Caribbean, but the experience they had was after that. The experience they had was after they had gone back there. They had a bad experience with turbulence, and they never set foot on a plane ever since. And they're very old, you know? We don't know my dad's exact age. I guess he's pushing 80 now. Been streaming for over 2 hours. The rain is still going here, folks. Raining cats and dogs. Speaking of cats and dogs, I do remember Mayweather got a lot of backlash when he was on a live. And I think he had some racial comments from Pacquiao fans. And he responded by saying, you guys eat cats and dogs. And he got a lot of backlash off that. Is this stream still live? Can you guys hear me? Let me know in the chat if you can still hear me. Look like my reception cut out there for a second. Can you guys hear me in the chat? Let me know. my reception getting all kind of booky here. I'm assuming because of this rain on that Starlink satellite is messing with it. Okay, I can be heard. That's good. Hey, big up Adeola Depot in the chat. Living the dream. Giving me a bit too much credit there, though. Not sure who I paved the way for, but big up Adeola Depot. Doing the damn thing. Afro Jam says, Hatman, do you remember John Canoe? Yes, of course. So John Canoe is a genre of music in the Bahamas, traditional music, but also a festival with obviously African pre-slavery roots. Big up EJ for the super chat. It says, I remember you said on Patreon that you did some personal development to build your articulation skills. Would you mind sharing what you did? So, believe it or not, I listened to a lot of Richard Dwyer. Now, obviously, Richard Dwyer is American, but I listened to the way that he would formulate his arguments and his breakdowns. He's a lawyer at the end of the day. And so, what are you as a lawyer? You are a professional at stating cases. So it helps to be articulate. So I actually got a lot of influence, particularly back in the days, from Richard Dwyer, with just the way he would structure his videos and structure his arguments and enunciate and speak more clearly and whatnot. Because I was all over the place when I first started YouTube, right? And I didn't want to pigeonhole myself to only being accessible is probably not the right word, but only appealing to people who come from my background, not necessarily just Black Caribbeans or Black Londoners or whatever, but, you know, people from urban environments in Britain or whatever. I didn't want to limit myself to just that audience. So I wanted to speak a bit more clearly, enunciate a bit more. And I've always liked language anyway. I always liked, in school, for example, English as a subject, creative writing. I did well in school when it came to English. So I've always liked the subject of language, different words, all that kind of stuff. So when you like something and you do it enough, you're going to improve. But it was definitely a conscious decision. Yeah, Richard Dwyer was definitely an early influence on me. Afro Jam says some Black Americans used to celebrate that too. Well, Bahamian culture is actually quite similar to some Black American cultures in the South, in places like Carolina. You can look this up. So even some of the colloquialisms that Bahamians use are shared by certain Black American communities in the South. Even the food is similar. I mean, for example, Bahamians eat grits. All right. Now that's something that in the South, not just Black people, but, you know, even white people in the South eat grits, but it's become synonymous with like working class Black Americans grits back in the days. Well, that's a staple of Bahamian food is grits. Yeah. It's not something which they eat that much in other Caribbean countries, as far as I'm aware. But in the Bahamas, yeah, grits is a thing. Big up EJ for the super chat. He says, also seeing Ade in the chat, for the love of God, can you speak to Eddie and get Hatman on boxing commentary on DAZN? Big up EJ for the super chat. Chili Beef says, God of War 2018 was something else when Kratos went back to get the blades. That was so moving. Exactly that, yes. Bahamas and Florida are very related because there are so many Bahamians in Florida. Bahamas is a very small country, maybe 350,000 people, tops the population. It's small. And the majority of Bahamians that don't live in the Bahamas, they live in Florida. Do I feel connected to the Bahamas? Not really, to be honest. Not really. I don't, because the Bahamas that I grew up in doesn't exist anymore. You know, like culturally, and in various other ways, that version of the Bahamas doesn't exist anymore. And I realized that when I lived back out there for a couple of years in my 20s, I was like, this ain't the place I grew up. So, I mean, so I just let it go. Do I ever go to Barbados? Yes, I have been to Barbados. Okay, a weird question here from Amali. He says, Hatman, is it zesty to eat a banana without cutting it? I don't even know how to answer that question, bro. That's a very strange question. Chris says they eat a lot of flying fish. Yes, they do. The national dish in Barbados is flying fish, I think. But they eat a lot of flying fish, yes. I'm not a massive fan of Bayesian food. It's not terrible, but, you know, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as various other Caribbean nations as far as food. The only thing I really found myself liking in Barbados was the fish cutters, which are fish sandwiches. Sounds basic, but when done right, they're really good. KD versus the World says, I assume Bahamas is now super Western. Well, it's very American. I want to say the Bahamas must be the most Americanized country in the Caribbean. And a lot of that is due to its proximity to Florida, because it's very close to Florida. So it's very, very American. Casa says, the British public in particular are extremely subservient and are very unlikely to ever have a revolution. Most will have no real issues with digital ID and CBDC. Maybe I'm optimistic, but I don't think the British public are as subservient as you think they are. See, my experience of British people has always been that they're quite independent relative to other Europeans. Maybe it's because of the fact that, you know, Britain is an island or a group of islands. And so not only are they geographically separate from the rest of Europe, but also culturally and psychologically. They tend to resist a lot of things that continental Europeans accept. For example, like the euro. Brits were just dead set against the euro from the moment it was introduced. They were like, no, we're not having it. So And also, Brits have this culture of, I don't know whether the way to describe it is apathy, but when you try to be too digi, when you try to introduce too many rules and regulations, Brits will look at you like, what, are you Hitler or something? Is this Germany? You know what I mean? Like, Brits have got this thing where they don't like being under too many rules, like a ridiculous number of rules, and having to strictly stick to rules and all this kind of stuff. And that might be why things don't run as well in Britain compared to somewhere like Germany, because, Germans are a bit more robotic and all that kind of stuff. I'm generalizing here. Whereas Brits are a bit more, fluid, and they don't like being strictly controlled to the same extent as some other nations. Do you know what I mean? Now, as far as a revolution, well, there might not be a violent revolution in Britain, but there might be a silent one. I'm not saying there will, I'm saying maybe. Yeah, exactly that, Joe Slatter. Brits have got an I cannot be asked attitude. And that's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can be really frustrating, the lack of enthusiasm that Brits have sometimes. But the lack of enthusiasm can be an advantage, right? In some cases. Imagine you're a Third Reich or communist type regime and you're trying to put Brits underneath it. Brits are like, man, I can't be arsed with this. Because in order to implement a regime like that successfully, the populace has to be enthusiastic about it. And Brits aren't enthusiastic about much other than like drinking and football. That sounds really bad, but no, Brits are generally not enthusiastic about things to the same extent as like other European nations are. Well, I'm generalizing, Chris, obviously. There's some Brits who don't like football and don't drink. I'm generalizing. Now, big up Dynamic Clips. He says, why is stamina in sparring different to a real match? Because of nerves. When you're in a real match, you get nervous, your body gets tense, and that burns up a lot of energy. So you find yourself in a real match getting tired way more quickly than you do in sparring. When you're relaxed, your body's relaxed, your body's working more efficiently, burning less energy. So it just comes down to nerves. The more comfortable you get in a real fight, the better your stamina is going to become, just because you're more relaxed. Action Popcast says, the problem I find in Britain is people talk a great game about standing up to authority, and when the moment comes, they fold like Mars bars on a radiator. Yeah, Brits are not the most confrontational bunch as far as standing up to authority, but they're also not enthusiastic, as I was just saying, about enforcing authority. Yeah? It's going to be harder to get Brits to be enthusiastic about enforcing an authoritarian police state than it would be getting Germans to do it. You know what I mean? So it's a double-edged sword. Pick up Jake Jones. He says, Hatman, have you watched the Leonardo DiCaprio film One Battle After Another? I haven't, but I do like DiCaprio as an actor. Am I into big game hunting? No, not really, although I do like fishing. I do like fishing, but no, I'm not compelled to try big game hunting, but yeah, fishing I like. Been fishing since I was a little kid. Truth Channel says, have people forgotten the poll tax uprising in the UK? Yeah, I lived through that. It was a different time in the UK. You know, you were coming out of the, Thatcher Britain and whatnot. Well, it was still Thatcher Britain. But what I mean to say is that was during the period of deindustrialization, where they were shutting down coal mines and steel works and all this sort of stuff. And in the 80s, you had astronomical unemployment levels in Thatcher's Britain. Absolutely astronomical. Unemployment levels have never come close to what they were in the 80s since, okay? And that unemployment, remember, this is before the internet age, led to an awful lot of poverty and disillusionment among Britain's working class. And that is what led to things like the poll tax riots. So although people complain about the state of Britain now, I can assure you, life in Britain today is not as physically hard as it was for a lot of working class Brits in the 80s. So it was just a harder generation of people because the times were harder. And that's what led to things like the poll tax riots and whatnot. And ultimately, the poll tax is still with us. They just changed the name of it to the council tax. Yeah. They just kicked the can down the road a little bit and introduced it as the council tax, and everyone accepted it. So ultimately, they got what they wanted. The state, you know? Poll tax was just renamed. Well, there are different ways of standing up to authority. You can stand up to authority by refusing to comply. It doesn't have to be riots. It doesn't have to be, physical. You could just refuse to comply. And Brits often do that, by the way. Brits will often just not comply and just say, I ain't doing that. Yeah, Brits will just not comply. So it's kind of like silent protest, that kind of thing. Brits often do that kind of thing. Exactly, like the TV license. Amali says, what do you think of the Tank situation with his ex? I really don't care. I really don't care about Tank and what he's doing and all that stuff. Like, whatever, man. What I can say about Tank is that birds of a feather flock together. I'm not justifying anything that Tank has done, but all I can tell you is that from what I've seen over the years, he's not exactly keeping the highest quality company, is he? Male or female company. And when you're around people like that, they're not exactly going to bring out the best in you. And, Tank Davis has been a very frustrating fighter over the years because he's so talented, but he's never seemed to love boxing. Certainly not for the past few years. He doesn't love boxing. And when a fighter doesn't love boxing and they see it as purely a job, that can translate into their performances and who they choose to fight and all that other stuff. And it starts to get very off-putting as a fan. KD versus the world says low vibrational people. Yeah, Tank stays around low vibrational people. And it's one of them ones where he hasn't worked, the way it looks anyway, he hasn't worked on himself to elevate himself. He just seems stuck in that like ghetto mentality, you know? With all the money he's got, he doesn't want to move away from those types of people. He wants to keep those kind of people in his circle, like the dregs of society in his circle. Very different to somebody like Terence Crawford, right? Now, Terence Crawford does have family members that still come across as a bit ratchet, but you get the impression that he's the kind of guy who only keeps friends with him who have decided to elevate with him. You know, who've decided to leave all that nonsense behind them and actually improve themselves. And maybe he's stepped away from the people who were not willing to improve themselves. As have I. I don't associate with some people that I grew up with anymore. Big up Chili Beef. He says, got a lock off, Hatman. Thanks for the stream. I'll catch up tomorrow. Hit the likes, people. Big up Chili Beef every time. Chris says, what is your most remembered or favorite rap bar? There are too many to name one. All right, interesting question there from Kevin. He says, what is your favorite personality in track and field from past and present? Favorite personality in track and field? Personality? I never found track and field to be full of that many great personalities, to be honest. I mean, I guess Usain Bolt was cool as a personality. He's okay. There were some personalities who I didn't think were cool, but I just found them funny. Not necessarily to laugh with, but laugh at. And I don't mean that in any kind of mean way. Some people you just find funny, you know? Chris Akabusi, I always just used to laugh at the way Chris Akabusi would talk. And anyone remember Chris Akabusi? Wave says, Hatman, have you ever heard of Young Spray? Yes, of course. Of course, Young Spray is from my generation, so I know all about Young Spray. Young Spray is the kind of character from my generation who I would not remain in contact with. That's what I'll say about him. You know, man in his 40s acting like he's 17 or 18 years old. Like, nah, bro. That's not... I can't keep man around like that. I can't keep man like that around me. That can't work. There you go. Some people... Yep. Chris Akabusi says, Dr. Wu says he visited my school and my school too. He visited my school. Chris Akabusi used to say, Awooga. You remember he had some weird... Is that actually a word in a Nigerian language? I got no idea. Maybe it's just a made-up sound. But Chris Akabusi used to go, Awooga. You guys remember that? I remember when he came to my school, everyone was like, Awooga. Yo. Yeah, he was an odd guy. He was an odd man. Or was it John Fashion? Are you sure? No, I'm sure Chris Akabusi was the Awooga guy. I'm 100% sure it was Akabusi. Maybe John Fashion you did it as well. Maybe were Chris Akabusi and John Fashion you friends? If they weren't friends, they should have been friends because they seem so similar. Yeah, John Fashion you did host Gladiators and Chris Akabusi was on Gladiators. Yeah, John Fashion, you hosted Gladiators and Chris Akabusi was on it. I think they were brethren. Little Jacob says Fashion used to say that on Gladiators. Both Nigerian, yep. Oh, okay. So so maybe that's where I got it from then. Maybe it was when Akabusi was on Gladiators, he copied Fashion You. Is that what it was? So Akabusi maybe got it from Fashion You, but I remember Akabusi saying it anyway. Shout out to Nathan for the super chat. It says, Hatman, thank you for your videos. I suffer with panic attacks and anxiety, and for whatever reason, your live videos calm me down mentally. You know, I'm so happy to hear comments like that, to read comments like that, you know, that I can make a positive impact on people who listen to my videos. So thank you for the super chat, and thank you even more for the words. I'm happy that I help people. Because this life can be tough, you know? It can be very tough. You know, I often have conversations with people about, I mean, recently I had to basically admonish a young lady who I'm seeing, and she's like a middle-class African, right? She never grew up in poverty. She doesn't know anything about what life is like on that side of the tracks. And she was being somewhat judgmental of, you know, some of the poor people that live here. And I had to kind of admonish her a little bit and say, well, you know, you've never been in their shoes. You don't know what it's like. You don't know how you might behave if you were in their position. That's not to justify some of the things that poor people, very poor people do, but, you know, you have to try and put yourself in the shoes of another person to before you can start to judge them, you know. But what I mean to say is, when I was still in the UK, there was a guy who used to sit outside the supermarket begging every day. And the guy had one leg. He used to sit there with a dog, day in, day out. Come rain, sun, hail, sleet, snow, he'd be there outside the supermarket begging. And some people have a very hostile attitude towards beggars like that. Get up and get a job or do something, or, you know, this, that, and the other. Some people will say, don't give them money. They're only going to spend it on drugs or booze. I know most of them are going to spend it on drugs or booze, right? As a homeless person in Britain, it's very hard to starve because there are so many places that give away free food to homeless people. It's not like in the developing world where people literally will starve if they're homeless in many cases. No, in Britain, you're not going to starve if you're a homeless person or a disabled person. Anyway, long story short, I would give this guy money. Even though I know he's probably going to spend it on booze or drugs, I'd give him money anyway. Because I don't know what it's like to have one flipping leg. I mean, it can't be easy, bro. And I just thought to myself, if I give him this money and he spends it on booze, well, maybe that's his relief. You know? Everyone can't get out of the rut that they're in. It's not as easy as people think it is. So I'm always like mindful of the struggles that different people go through. I wouldn't trade all the money in the world, right? I mean, for example, you couldn't pay me 10 billion in exchange for my legs. Do you know what I mean? Like, having an able body is invaluable to most people, yeah? Would you exchange both your legs for 10 billion? I definitely wouldn't. I'd rather be poor and have my legs than no legs and 10 billion. Now, some people might say that's crazy. You could get prosthetic legs. I don't care. I like having my real legs. Anyway, I'm going off somewhere else here. But the point I want to make is I'm a compassionate person. I'm not saying I'm like Mr. I do charity everywhere, but I do have a decent level of compassion for people, particularly people that have been through stuff that I've never been through, and have had a much harder life than myself. So if my content here on this little corner of YouTube can help anyone, right? It doesn't have to be a homeless person or someone without legs. It could be someone that suffers from anxiety or depression or whatever the case may be, someone that's going through something in their lives and they find my tone and my chatter to be uplifting or amusing or entertaining in some way. I'm happy for that, because we all need some upliftment, a boost sometimes, We all need that sometimes. Big up Nathaniel, Nathaniel Talks for the super chat. Much appreciated, and I'm very happy that I'm having a positive effect for you there. Fernie G says, Hatman, I've heard you say The X-Files is your favorite TV show. What do you think about the movies? I found that part 2 lacked any of the supernatural elements that made the show great. The first movie was decent. The second movie was trash. But by the time the second movie came out, the TV series itself was pretty weak. So there's that. It had lost its steam. It run out of steam by the time the second movie came out. Okay, interesting question there from the box. He says, how come you discontinued your phrase, what brand of crack are you smoking? So it's not discontinued. It's just mothballed for now because we're not living at this current time in boxing in an era where fanboys are all about us. Okay? That phrase was mainly used during periods of extreme high fanboy activity. The fanboys have died down a lot now. Obviously, there's still fanboys around, but there isn't any like real superstar fighters whose fanboys are going crazy at the minute. So when there are, I will de-mothball that phrase and bring it back out again. Action Popcast says, I'm moving house and I've just packed up my X-Files DVDs, one of the few boxes I'm keeping. Oh, for real? Big up Chainsaw. He says, I bought one of your t-shirts back in the days and wore it in the gym. I hope I live to see the day when I'm in the presence of somebody wearing my merch. Then I'll know I've made it. Big up Chainsaw. Little Jacob says, X-Files hasn't aged well. I think it's aged tremendously well. But it depends on which episodes you're watching and which season you're watching. I think it's aged very well. Particularly the episodes pertaining to not so much the alien stuff, but more so like government shenanigans. I think those episodes have aged very well. For example, there's an episode of The X-Files called Wet Wired. Yeah, check out an episode called Wet Wired. And that episode is basically about a covert government operation to test basically mind control technology on a local community. And the inspiration for that episode came from experiments that were done, I think in the 1960s in parts of America, with doing experiments on small towns and spiking drinking water with LSD and all sorts of weird stuff like that. So the inspiration for that episode came from that. And I think episodes like that in particular have held up very well. And one of the reasons I like The X-Files so much is because of the variety of subject matter that it covered. It covered everything from, pretty standard run-of-the-mill government shenanigans to the occult, spirituality, aliens, cryptids, supernatural stuff. Literally everything that you could think of was covered in The X-Files. Even religion. They covered religion in many episodes of The X-Files. So, it depends on, maybe some of the visual effects for some episodes haven't held up that well, like particularly season 1. If you go back and watch Tombs, the first part of Tombs, you're like, these visual effects don't really hold up now. But once you get to like season 3 and 4, when it's in full swing, I think X-Files has aged very well. Action Popcar says, Wet Wired is season 3, it's fantastic. Yeah, Wet Wired, one of my favorite episodes. And for like a light-hearted episode, because that's another thing I loved about the X-Files, is that the tone of the episodes would be totally different from one to the next. So some episodes have got like a comedic tone. Other episodes have got like a surreal tone. Other episodes have got a very serious, modern drama type tone. And that's one of the reasons I loved it as well. You had so much variety in the tone of the episodes. That's right. Yep, I know my X-Files. So if you want to watch an episode that had that kind of light-hearted, humorous tone, Quagmire is a good episode to watch. That's just like a funny, light-hearted kind of episode called Quagmire. Another episode that was really good was called Clyde. Is it Clyde Bruckman or Druckmann? I think it's Clyde Bruckman's Final Response. That's an episode about a psychic. Very funny. Yeah, great writing on that episode. Just watch Clyde Bruckman's Final Response. A great episode about a psychic who assists them in solving a murder case. There's a serial killer on the loose, and this psychic helps him solve the case. Clyde Bruckman's Final Response. Great episode. Holds up perfectly today. And interestingly, right, just a random bit of trivia here. In terms of visual fidelity, there are certain remastered movies from the 70s and 80s that look better than movies that were remastered from, let's say, the early 2000s. And I've never really thought about why this was. So an example would be the Star Wars movies, yeah? If you look at the original Star Wars trilogy, the remastered versions look noticeably better than the remastered versions of the prequels, right? The original prequel trilogy. And the reason for this is that film obviously cannot be directly equated to a particular pixel count, because with film, it's based upon film grains, and the number of grains and the size of the grains can vary from frame to frame. But film is roughly equivalent to a 4K image if you're dealing with the actual master copy of that film. Yeah. Now, using that master back in the 70s and 80s, they would then use basically a degraded copy to show at cinemas and then to show on television. So people weren't getting the full fidelity version of the master when they were watching on the cinema or on TV. It's not until digital media came along and they had the means to actually scan the master into a digital form that they were able to basically unlock the full fidelity of those old movies that were shot on film, like Star Wars and many others. Yeah. The reason that the Star Wars prequels, even the remastered versions, don't look as good as the original trilogy from the 70s and 80s is because the Star Wars prequels with all the CG were shot digitally. They weren't shot on film. And they were shot, I think, in 2K. So basically, the native resolution of 2K is actually slightly inferior to film. Yeah, 2K digital is slightly inferior, well, significantly inferior to film. Again, film is not exactly 4K because it's not pixels, it's grains. But yeah. Big up Charles B in the chat. He says, Scully drives me insane. She literally will see a shapeshifter or something and then be skeptical about anything Mulder says or does. But that's the beauty of the X-Files, because Mulder and Scully represent the two conflicting archetypes, you know? That's the genius of it. Scully represents the materialist, reductionist skeptic, and that is representative of the majority of the population. And Mulder represents the awake and aware, I guess you could say truther, right? That represents the minority of the population. And the strengths and weaknesses of both of those character types are explored and exposed in the X-Files, yeah? So even Mulder, even though he's this guy who's awake and aware, sometimes he can become fanatical. And it can backfire on him because he's fanatical. So they need each other, actually, to balance each other out. But yeah, it's like a running joke in the X-Files where Scully will literally see, you know, aliens playing basketball in front of her and shooting hoops and stuff. And then the next episode, she'll dismiss it all. Oh, maybe I was hallucinating. Yeah. Yeah, the skeptic and the believer. But both of them are pathological, right? So Scully is like a pathological skeptic. She's so skeptical that when she sees evidence of something that challenges her very rigid establishment worldview, she won't believe her eyes. Do you know what I mean? She'll deny her own eyes because there isn't a peer-reviewed paper to substantiate what she's actually seen and experienced, which is illogical, right? But Mulder is, you know, the polar opposite of that. He's somebody who will believe things with sometimes good evidence, but other times virtually no evidence or dodgy evidence, and he will just wholeheartedly rush in to believe it. So they're both extreme and pathological, but just on opposite ends of the spectrum. Striker says, yeah, there's some low-budget exploitation flicks from the early 70s that some companies have released newly remastered 4K scans, and they look mind-blowing. Yeah, that's the thing. Film, if you can just get the master of a film, from back in the 70s or the 80s, the master copy is actually higher resolution than early digital. You know, early digital, a lot of them were shot in 2K and stuff like that. And film is higher resolution, basically, than 2K film. Yeah, there's another thing about films these days, not just with regards to the CGI, which can kind of break the immersion when there's too much CGI in a film and the nature of the CGI, it doesn't look real. But also it's to do with focal lengths. So in movies these days, they tend to use like really shallow focal lengths to go for that blurred background and, you know, in focus things close to the camera and whatnot. Whereas in older movies, particularly things like Westerns and stuff like that, they would use like really, really big focal lengths where everything is in focus. The background's in focus, the foreground's in focus, everything's in focus. And that is more immersive. See, today with a lot of films, they try to they try to create art. You know, they try to make something that looks visually, how can I describe it now? Visually different, or visually, something that has visual flair rather than something that is equivalent to what you would see with the naked eye, if that makes sense. A lot of the older movies were shot in a way that is more similar to what your naked eye would see if you were there in that location. And that made them more immersive. Also, one thing I don't particularly care for in modern movies is how many cuts there are, right? The editing is just so full of constant cuts. I find that jarring. I like older movies. One of the reasons I like older movies is because they would have longer shots, fewer cuts, and you get to actually drink in the atmosphere and the ambience of the scene more than having these constant cuts all the time. It really grinds my gears, all the damn cuts. Big up Ali for the super chat. It says, Hatman, can you see my comment in the live chat? Can I see your comment? Hang on. I've not been looking at the live chat for a couple of minutes while I've been monologuing. Oh, you're talking about the Ishmael Davis. No, I haven't seen that yet. Yeah, you did tell me about Ishmael Davis, the threat that he gave to Josh Kelly. I haven't seen that yet. I will get around to doing that. Big up Ali for the super chat. Charles B says, yeah, if anything, Scully might be the higher IQ, but Mulder is more imaginative. And that's the thing. I've always said that IQ is not a comprehensive measure of intelligence, because there are different forms of intelligence. Yeah? First of all, how do we define intelligence? Intelligence to me is defined by the ability that a person has to analyze, to critically analyze information in order to get to truth. That's the best way I would define it in a nutshell, okay? And obviously, some people are better at analyzing and processing some types of information than others. Some people are very good with things like numbers, equations, measurements, calculus, so on and so forth. But some of those people are not very good at understanding human behavior, all right? They're not so good when it comes to analyzing human psychology. So there are different types of intelligence, you know? Yeah, for sure, Ali, I'll give it a watch and I'll let you know. And so with Mulder, I would say he had better social intelligence than Scully. Scully maybe had greater intelligence for, science and mathematics and all that kind of stuff. But her character wasn't as socially intelligent as Mulder was. Maybe Mulder was not social, maybe Mulder was socially awkward, but he understood people better than Scully did. Because Mulder's background was he was basically a criminal psychologist. I think that's what they had him, the character studied in Oxford and stuff like that. And he was like an expert criminal profiler and all that kind of thing. So Mulder's background was in psychology. So he understood people much better than Scully did. Exactly, Charles B. Yeah, Mulder was more intuitive. Yeah, I agree with that regarding the sound as well. I don't like the sound in movies now. You can't hear what they're saying. Yeah, there's too much dynamic range and the music's too loud. And yeah, if you watch like Westerns from back in the days, Clint Eastwood films, you can hear every word crystal clear. But somehow in the new movies, it's like the music is so loud and the dynamic range of the dialogue is so big and can't hear what people are saying. All right, peeps, I'm going to draw this one to a close. You know the routine. Shout out to each and every one of you for joining the conversation, and a special shout out to those who donated via Super Chat. They were Luca, Kayvon Green, James Clifford. Big up James Clifford. Matt Borgerson, Ben Odom, Rex, EJ, big up EJ, Dynamic Clips, Nathaniel Talks, and Ali. Big up each and every one of you for supporting via Super Chat, and shout out to everyone else who joined the conversation. Until next time, please take care, be good. I'll catch you all on the other side. I'm out.